Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 5 True Hauntings from historic graveyards. Real scary encounters, we return to the quiet edges of the world, where the hum of the living fades, and only the wind moves through the graves. These are the stories buried in stone and soil, tombs that whisper, monuments that bleed history, and resting places that refuse to rest. Every account you're about to hear is real, taken from those who've stood before these graves and felt the chill of something watching from below. My goal this month is to reach 4,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers wander in, listen, and vanish into the dark without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a grave or cemetery in your town that truly unsettles you, type its name below. Because when the world sleeps and the soil settles, some things beneath it do not rest. Kill the lights, silence the world. Take a slow breath, and let us begin. My name is Caleb, and I'm from New Hope, Pennsylvania. I never thought I'd end up in East Texas, much less living across from a cemetery. It just kind of worked out that way. My cousin Jared moved down here first for a logistics job in Tyler, and a year later, he called and said his roommate bailed and rent was killing him. At the time, I was doing inventory work for a big box store outside Dallas and crashing in a crappy extended stay. So the idea of a small house and splitting bills sounded pretty good. I figured I'd stay a few months, save some money, then move on. That was almost 3 years ago. The place we found was one of those short, tired-looking houses you see on county roads down here. One story, faded white siding, a little front porch that leans more than it should. What sold Jared on it was the price and the fact it sat right across from Cedar Hill Cemetery. The listing called it a quiet historic view. The landlord just shrugged and said, "Dead neighbors don't complain." Jared laughed way too hard at that. He's that kind of person. I actually liked the cemetery at first. It's modest in size, maybe a couple acres, laid out in a rectangle with a black iron fence around it and a decorative gate that squeaks when the wind gets up. Most of the stones date back to the 1870s and 1880s. Near the front, everything's neat, straight rows, trimmed grass, a little gravel path that crunches under your shoes. Further back, it starts to get wild. The ground sinks in spots, tall grass takes over, and some of the headstones lean like they're tired of standing. There's a broken angel statue in the middle with half a wing missing, and off to the far right, there's this one grave set apart from the rest. Just a low stone with no name on it. Someone poured concrete around it sometime in the 70s from the look of it, like they wanted to make sure it stayed put. There's a metal bench facing that one stone, and only that one. During the day, it's honestly peaceful. Big oak trees around the edges, crows squabbling in the branches, the smell of cut grass when the grounds crew comes through every other week. You hear pickups downshifting on the highway a mile away, and dogs barking in the distance. On Sundays, the little church at the end of the road rings its bell, and the sound drifts right over the stones and into our kitchen if the windows are open. I'd sit on the porch sometimes with a beer, listen to the bell, watch dragonflies over the grass, and it felt settled. I don't know how else to say it. I work nights now. That wasn't the plan either. The inventory job cut hours, so I picked up a second gig taking the night security shift for the same cemetery I was staring at from my front porch. It sounded almost stupidly easy. Walk the grounds a few times a night, make sure nobody's drinking or tagging stones, check that the gate is locked, and then sit in a little prefab office by the maintenance shed and watch a couple of cameras on an old monitor. 11 at night until 7 in the morning, 4 nights a week. Jared joked that I was babysitting bones, and asked if I'd start wearing one of those big cartoon keys on my belt. Jared and I get along fine. We're not super close, but we grew up seeing each other at holidays, so it's comfortable. He leaves for work early, gets back around 6, and spends most of his evenings gaming with headphones on. We cross paths in the kitchen, trade leftovers, argue about whose turn it is to buy coffee. Real normal stuff. He liked to give me a hard time about my graveyard shift from the moment I took it. That's what he called it, like he was the first person to think of that joke. Life settled into a routine. I'd sleep until 2 in the afternoon, make coffee, run errands in town. New Hope is a touristy place. This little East Texas town is not. We've got a grocery, a couple gas stations, a diner, and a hardware store. People tend to know who you are after a few months, whether you want them to or not. By 9 or so, I'd eat with Jared if we were both home. Maybe sit on the porch a bit if the weather wasn't too humid. Then I'd walk across the 2-lane road, key in through the side gate, and start my shift. At first, it really was as quiet as promised. You get used to the sounds at night faster than you'd think. Crickets and tree frogs, wind moving through the oaks, the occasional truck on the road throwing white light through the fence bars. The iron gate ticks when it cools down after sunset. The security office has this old window unit that rattles and smells like dust. On still nights, you can hear the wood in our house settling from across the road, little pops and creaks. It all blends together into a kind of background noise. The first weird thing was small enough that I almost forgot about it. It was late August, hot even at midnight, that wet kind of heat that sticks to your neck. I was doing my second walkthrough around 1 in the morning. The gravel crunched under my boots, and the motion light at the maintenance shed clicked on when I passed. I made my usual loop along the fence, cut through the older section near the Broken Angel, and happened to glance toward the back right corner. There was a light out there. I remember thinking it was somebody's phone at first. It had that soft, moving glow, not a bright flashlight beam. It bobbed a little, like someone walking slowly between the stones, maybe 50 yards from me near that isolated grave. I stopped, listened. No footsteps, no voices, nothing but the insects and a dog barking somewhere far off. The light slid behind a headstone and disappeared. We get teenagers sometimes, I called out. Just a simple, "Hey, park's closed," trying not to sound like a jerk. No answer. I walked toward where I'd seen it. The grass was a little damp around my ankles, and I could smell that turned earth smell you get where they've been digging recently, even though we didn't have any new burials that week. My flashlight beam swept between the stones. Nothing. No one. When I got to the back fence, I checked with the light all the way along. It's solid iron. No gaps big enough for a person. The corner where the unmarked grave is sat there, same as always. Concrete ring, low stone, bench facing it. No sign of anyone. I told myself I'd probably seen a car light through the trees or something. Maybe one of the houses behind the cemetery, even though they're pretty far out. Stuff reflects weird at night. I logged it as suspected trespasser, nothing found, and went back to the office. By 3 in the morning, I'd talked myself out of it. A week later, it happened again. Different night, same time. I checked the monitor and saw a faint glow on the far edge of the grainy camera feed. The system's old, the kind where everything looks washed out and gray-green. But you could see it, this little round light drifting across the back row. I sighed, grabbed my flashlight, and went out. This time, Jared had texted me some stupid meme right before I saw it, so I was already a little keyed up. I crossed the gravel, my boots loud in the quiet. When I rounded the Broken Angel and got a clear line of sight, the light was already moving toward that same separated grave. There was still no sound, no crunch of shoes, no breath, nothing. Just the wind pushing through the oaks and the faint buzz from the streetlight by our house. "Sir," I called. "Park's closed." You can't be here right now." The light paused. For a second, it just hung there, like it had turned to look at me. I felt stupid for thinking that, even in the moment. Then it dipped, like whoever was holding it lowered their hand toward the ground and blinked out. I got to the grave and swept the flashlight around. The bench was empty. There were no fresh footprints in the dirt, nothing disturbed in the grass. The air felt cooler right there, though, enough that I could see my own breath just a little, like when you blow on a window. I walked the fence again, locked, no cars on the road. I even checked the ditch outside for tracks or tire ruts. Nothing. When I got home that morning, the sky just starting to go pale, Jared was at the kitchen table eating cereal before work. I poured coffee and told him about it, mostly because I needed to say it out loud to see how it sounded. "So like, an actual lantern?" he said. "Old-timey?" "I don't know," I said. "Could have been a phone with a yellow filter, I guess. It just didn't look like that, the way it moved." "Maybe you've got a Civil War reenactor," he said and laughed. "You getting hazard pay for ghosts?" I rolled my eyes and changed the subject. It felt silly, even to me. 2 nights in 3 weeks doesn't make a pattern. Except it did. By the middle of September, I noticed it always happened close to 1:30 in the morning. Not every shift, but often enough that I started checking my watch. The first few times I saw it only outside. Then I started catching it on the monitors first, a tiny round flare of light in the far corner of the screen. The old cameras don't pick up color well, but the glow was always warmer than anything else. I tried to be methodical about it. If I saw it on the screen, I'd note the time, check which camera caught it, then go out in a calm circle instead of just walking straight toward it. I told myself it could be a reflection from our porch light across the way, or from a passing car that only showed up at a certain angle. I even parked my car in different spots to see if my headlights were bouncing weird on the fence when I left for work. Nothing matched. One night, I didn't go out when I saw it. That's what I'm not proud of. I watched it move from left to right along the back row, slow and steady, and I just sat there with my coffee going cold in my hand. The light stopped at the unmarked grave like it always did. On the screen, you could just barely see the corner of the bench. The glow hung there for a good 30 seconds, then faded, like someone dimmed a lamp. I rewound the footage twice. No person, no shape, just the light. I took that tape to my supervisor, a guy named Mike, who mostly works days. He shrugged and said the system had glitches. "Cameras are older than you, son," he said. "Could be a bug, could be moisture, could be angels. As long as the fence is locked and the stones ain't tagged, we're good." At the grocery store, I mentioned it in a casual way to the woman at the register, Ms. Graves. Yeah, that's really her name. She's in her 60s, been in town forever. I said something about kids sneaking in with lanterns at night. Her hands paused on the scanner just a second. "Folks shouldn't be back there after dark," she said. "That back row's not for visiting." "What's that mean?" I asked. She shook her head and gave me that closed look people here get when you ask the wrong thing. "You just do your rounds and keep that gate shut, honey." Then she changed the subject to the weather. After that, I stopped bringing it up. The first time it crossed the road, I didn't realize that's what had happened. It was early October, cooler at night, that nice stretch before the damp winter sets in. I came home from a shift feeling more tired than usual. The crickets were still going, but softer, like they were far away. Our porch light was flickering. The bulb does that every couple months. I made a mental note to pick up a new one. As I walked up the steps, I heard gravel grind behind me, like someone taking a single step. I turned. The street was empty. The cemetery gate sat closed. The shape of the broken angel just a darker smudge in the sky. The air smelled like wet dirt, even though we hadn't had rain in days. I chalked it up to a truck passing somewhere down the road and went inside. Jared was still asleep. I locked the front door, put my keys in the bowl by the kitchen, and went toward the hallway. Halfway there, I stopped. There was a little line of dark smears on the floor, starting just inside the door and going 3 steps in. Mud. You could see the edge where someone's heel had slipped a bit, the way it does when you step off gravel onto linoleum. For some reason, my first thought was that Jared had tracked it in the night before and forgotten to clean it. But his boots were by the back door, dry. When I touched the smear, it came away damp on my fingers, with a gritty feel. Like the soil from the back corner of the cemetery. I know that texture better than I wish I did. I got paper towels, wiped it up, and told myself I'd stepped through something outside and just now noticed. I slept badly that morning, though. Every time the house creaked, I half woke. At one point, I could have sworn I heard the gate across the road give its little metallic whine, like it does when someone opens it, but I was too far gone into a dream to be sure. A few nights later, Jared met me on the porch when I came home. He had his coffee mug in his hand, and this squinty, serious look he gets when he's trying not to sound crazy. "You been messing with me?" he said. "About what?" "Lights," he said. "Last couple nights I wake up around 1:30, bathroom trip, and I keep seeing a light over there." He nodded toward the cemetery, like somebody walking with a lantern or something. "I thought it was you, but then I checked the clock and you'd already texted you were on break in the office. I could see your stupid little desk lamp through the fence. This was way in the back." I felt my face go cold in the humid air. "Did you see anyone?" "No," he said. "That's the weird part. It's like just the light. I figured you were driving the cart with something hanging off it, but there wasn't any engine sound. Last night it looked like it came right up to that weird grave on the side. You know, the one by itself. Then it just went dark." I didn't tell him about the camera, or the tape, or the mud on the floor. I just said, "Yeah, I've been seeing it too. Probably some kind of reflection." "From what?" he said. "There's nothing back there. Trees and pasture. Unless cows started buying flashlights." He laughed at his own joke, but it sounded thin. After that, I started paying more attention to the house, not just the grounds. Little things stood out. The back door would be unlatched in the morning, even though I knew I'd thrown the deadbolt. The hallway felt colder than the living room when I walked through it at night, enough that the hair on my arms stood up. Once, when I was half asleep on the couch, waiting for coffee to finish, I heard what sounded like a man's voice say my name from down the hall. Not loud, just conversational, like someone reminding me they were there. "Caleb?" I thought it was Jared at first. When I went to check, his door was closed and I could hear him snoring softly. The air in the hallway smelled like damp earth and something metallic, like old tools. I opened the front door and checked the lock twice after that. I tried to logic it all out. Our house is old. Doors shift, latches slip. We live across from a cemetery. Of course, our brains fill in blanks with spooky crap when we're tired. The human mind looks for patterns. I repeated all of that to myself like a script. It helped enough that I kept going to work. In late October, the cemetery office got a new file cabinet. Mike told me to move the old paper records from the back closet into it. Said it would be a good way to stay awake and look useful. Most of the folders were dull. Maintenance invoices, burial permits, old maps. The Cedar Hill Burial Register goes back to 1874. The handwriting changes over the decades, careful script turning into shaky ballpoint. Reading through it feels like listening in on a town's whole life. I was halfway through a stack when I realized there was a separate section at the back labeled Unmarked Relocated. Yellowed pages, newer than the rest, maybe from the 70s or 80s. It listed a handful of graves that were moved or covered over when the county widened the road. One entry had no name, just unknown male, probable grounds worker, with a note that he'd been killed on site in some kind of accident in 1911. Cause of death was hard to read, but I could make out crushed and night watch. There were coordinates written next to it and a little hand-drawn square. When I lined it up with the modern map on the wall, The spot matched the separated grave in the back right corner. I sat there with the folder open on my knees and the air conditioner humming. The clock on the wall ticked toward 1:30. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Lots of cemeteries have unknown burials. Accidents happened all the time in the early days. It didn't connect to me. It didn't connect to anything. The camera monitor flickered. I looked up. On the screen, camera 3, the back row, had that familiar warm blur in the corner. The light drifted along the fence, just at the edge of the lens, then turned toward the isolated grave. I watched it, folder still open on my knee. When it reached the stone, it stopped. My name was written in ink about an inch above that little square on the page. Unknown male, probable grounds worker, night watch. The last 2 words were underlined by someone, maybe decades ago. I could have sworn, just for a second, that the underlined words glistened like wet ink. I blinked and it was just paper again. I grabbed my flashlight and went out, more to prove something to myself than anything else. The gravel under my boots sounded too loud. As I pushed through the gate, the iron gave its usual whine. The night felt heavier than usual, like the air was thicker. Crickets were still going, but farther away again, like someone had turned down the volume. When I rounded the broken angel, I saw it. Not the light at first. The bench. Someone was sitting on it. I stopped dead. My heart thumped once, hard. Whoever it was sat very still, shoulders slightly hunched. There was a faint glow in front of them, as if from a small lantern held low. I could see the outline of their arm, or I thought I could. "Sir," I said, my voice sounding way too loud in the quiet. "You can't be here after hours." The figure didn't move. The glow bobbed once, like it had been nudged, then slid sideways off the bench and dropped out of sight, like somebody had let go of it. I heard no clatter, no glass breaking. The shape on the bench seemed to thin out and fold into the dark. I walked forward because that's what you do when you're on the clock and you don't want to think about other options. Each step felt like it took a full minute. When my flashlight beam finally hit the bench, it was empty. The unmarked stone sat in front of it, gray and low. On the ground between them lay an old lantern. It was the kind with a metal frame and glass sides, the kind you see in antique stores. Rust flecked the handle. One of the glass panes was cracked. There was no flame burning inside, but the metal felt warm when I touched it, like it had been sitting near a fire. A thin line of damp mud ran from the base of the stone to the bench, like someone with wet boots had dragged their heels there. I picked up the lantern, more out of stubbornness than sense, and carried it back to the office. On the way, the air seemed to warm up again. The crickets got louder. Somewhere off in the dark, a train horn blew, long and low, and I almost laughed because it felt like something out of a movie. I set the lantern on the desk next to the monitor and sat down. My hands were shaking just a little, enough that I had to steady my coffee mug with both. On the screen, the back corner of the cemetery looked empty. No light, no movement. When my shift ended at 7, I didn't know what to do with the lantern. It didn't feel right to leave it in the office, like it belonged somewhere else. I ended up carrying it home with me, telling myself I'd clean it up and maybe hang it on the porch as a decoration. Jared was already gone for work. I put the lantern on the kitchen counter and went to bed. I woke up around noon to the sound of the screen door creaking. It does that sometimes when the wind catches it. Sunlight was coming through the blinds in strips. The house felt stuffy and warm. I got up, walked into the kitchen, and stopped. The lantern was gone from the counter. In its place was a little line of dried mud, flaked and cracked, leading from the edge of the counter to the hallway and then fading out. The front door was locked. The screen was closed. The back door was locked too. I checked every closet like an idiot, half expecting to find Jared playing some elaborate prank on me. But but he doesn't have that kind of patience. When I texted him, he wrote back, "Lantern? Dude, what?" That night at work, the cameras showed nothing at 1:30. No light, no movement. The bench in the back corner sat empty. When I walked out there, the unmarked grave looked undisturbed except for a small, fresh patch of turned earth near the base of the stone, as if someone had pressed a boot down and twisted it. I didn't see the lantern anywhere. Life kept going. That's the weirdest part, maybe. You still pay bills and wash dishes, and forget to take out the trash, even when something's wrong in the background. I thought about quitting, but then the rent reminder would hit my inbox, and I'd tell myself to stop being dramatic. A couple of odd nights and a misplaced antique didn't add up to anything you could put on a police report. Jared stopped joking about the cemetery. One morning, he mentioned he'd started waking up at exactly 1:30, with his heart racing. No dream he could remember, like somebody had just said his name right next to his ear. He said it laughing, but he wouldn't look at the window while he talked. At the grocery store, Ms. Graves rang up my stuff and then said, without looking at me, "You doing all right over there, Caleb?" "Yeah," I said. "Why?" She shrugged one shoulder. "Sometimes that job gets under folks' skin, that's all." She slid my receipt across. "Best not to bring anything home with you." I wanted to ask her what she meant. I didn't. The last straw, if you can even call it that, was small enough that anyone else would probably shrug. I was heading out to work one evening and realized I'd left my phone in the house. I'd already locked the car, so I jogged back up the porch steps, annoyed at myself. The sun was just going down, that washed-out blue you get before it turns dark. Crickets were starting up. The cemetery across the road looked flat and calm behind its iron fence. When I opened the door, the house smelled like damp dirt again. Not strong, just faint, like someone had come in with wet boots. I found my phone on the coffee table, right where I'd left it, with a little half circle of dried mud on the rug in front of it, like a heel mark. Next to it, on the arm of the couch, sat the lantern. It was clean now, no rust on the handle, no crack in the glass. The metal looked dark and oiled. Inside, the wick was trimmed neat. When I touched it, it was warm. I stood there in the quiet living room, listening to the refrigerator hum, and the faint buzz of the porch light through the wall. The hairs on the back of my neck lifted. I put my phone in my pocket, picked up the lantern, and carried it back across the road. I didn't sign in at the office or check the cameras. I went straight through the side gate to the back corner. The ground around the unmarked grave looked freshly turned, darker than the rest of the grass. I set the lantern on the concrete ring at the base of the stone and stepped back. The air felt cooler again, like it always did there. I could hear the insects going softer, then stopping altogether for a few seconds. For a moment, everything was very still. "Whoever you are," I said, feeling stupid talking to a rock, "you can stay here. I'm not doing this in my house." Nothing answered, of course. The silence just stretched a little. Then the crickets started up again at full volume, like someone had flipped a switch. The cameras didn't catch any strange lights that night, or the next week. The mud stopped appearing in the hallway. The smell faded. Jared started sleeping through 1:30 again. I still work there. I still live across the road. Sometimes, when I'm in the office, I look at that registry page with the underlined Night Watch and wonder if whoever wrote it made a mistake, or if they knew exactly what they were putting down. And every so often, usually on clear nights when the moon is bright enough to cast shadows of the fence onto our front yard, I think I see a faint glow way in the back corner, near that bench, like a lantern someone's cupping in their hands. I don't go out to check anymore. The fence was never meant to keep anyone out. My name is Evan, and I'm from Natchitoches, Louisiana. I rent this little one-story place on a quiet street just outside town, the kind of street people forget exists unless they live on it. The house is nothing special. Faded yellow siding, sagging front steps, a porch that creaks in 3 specific spots when you walk across it. What makes it different, I guess, is what's across the road. Directly across from my front porch, maybe 50 yards away, there's this modest old cemetery with an iron fence around it, the kind where the paint's flaked off and you can see rust eating through in spots. It's not huge, it's just a modest 1870s-looking cemetery crammed into a rectangle of land between the road and a stand of old oaks. Near the gate, it's neat and kind of pretty, honestly. Short grass, a gravel path, flowers on some of the newer graves. But if you follow the path toward the back, it stops making sense. The grass starts to win. The stones lean in odd directions. Some of them have sunk so low, you only see the tops. In the center, there's this broken angel statue on a pedestal. Worn down so bad, the face is just a blur. And all the way. At the very back, past the angel, there's a line of massive live oaks, draped in heavy Spanish moss. People around here call them the hanging trees. I didn't move there for any creepy reason. It was just cheap. I work as a data analyst for a logistics company, remotely, so I basically live in spreadsheets and dashboards all day. My cousin Tyler moved in with me a couple months after I signed the lease. He got a job at a plant outside town and needed a place fast, and splitting the rent made sense. The landlord gave us some story about historic charm when we signed, but really it's just an old house with thin walls and a good view of a graveyard. Thing is, the cemetery didn't bother me at first. If anything, it felt peaceful. I'd sit on the porch in the evenings with a mug of coffee, watching the sun go down behind the oaks. Sometimes I'd hear the bells from the church a couple streets over, or a train horn way off across the river. A couple crows liked to hop along the fence posts, yelling at each other. It was quiet in that way that feels full, if that makes sense. You could hear insects buzzing in the grass, leaves scraping on the pavement when a car rolled by, the soft crunch of someone walking on gravel if a visitor came. The town itself is small, old, and kind of proud of that. Brick sidewalks downtown, a few antique shops, a bakery that's been there longer than anybody can remember. People know each other's business. You buy a soda at the gas station. The clerk asks how your aunt's surgery went. That kind of place. So having a family cemetery from the 1870s across the road just fit. Another old thing that had always been there. Tyler's the one who made jokes about it. He'd come home late from the plant, boots loud on the porch, and look across the road like, well, at least the neighbors are quiet. Or he'd flick his cigarette toward the fence and say, bet they get pissed if you park on their side. It was all like that. Light, stupid stuff. I'd roll my eyes and tell him not to ash into the grass because the landlord was weird about the yard. I'm not some big tough guy, but I'm pretty rational. I like numbers, patterns, things I can measure. That's my comfort zone. So of course the thing I do for fun on weekends is the exact opposite of that. I run this small YouTube channel about local folklore and so-called haunted places. It started as a joke with some friends in college. Paranormal investigations with air quotes. We'd go into old buildings with cheap audio recorders and night vision apps and then spend way too long listening for EVPs that were obviously just air conditioners. It stuck though. I never really quit. By the time I moved into that house, I'd already done a few small videos on cemeteries and old churches around the area. Nothing dramatic, just walking around, telling local stories, trying to make it sound creepy for the viewers. Half the time, I was editing out my own yawns when I realized my new place was directly across from a cemetery named Spanish Moss Cemetery. Tiny sign near the gate, paint peeling, letters barely readable. It felt kind of convenient. I told Tyler I should do one right there. I moved across from a graveyard kind of thing. He told me I'd finally save on gas. The first month, nothing weird happened. We got used to the rhythm of the place. I'd hear cars once in a while, dogs barking a few streets over, the sound of the plant's distant hum when the wind was right. Inside the house, the wood popped and settled at night. The old radiator would bang when it kicked on, making us jump until we learned the pattern. Sometimes the porch light would flicker if the washer and microwave ran at the same time. Old wiring stuff. The cemetery just sat across the road the whole time, doing what cemeteries do, which is nothing. The first small thing came on one of those really still nights. You know, the kind where the air feels heavy and the trees barely move. I was working late, sitting at the little desk by the front window. Screens glowing, empty coffee mug next to me. Tyler was on a night shift at the plant, so I was alone in the house. I got up to stretch and wandered to the front door. I didn't even know why. I just felt like stepping out for a second. When I opened the door, the screen door creaked in that long, dragging way it has, and the night air hit me, warm, damp, smelling like wet dirt and cut grass. Across the road, the cemetery gate was swinging. Not wildly, just moving. It would swing open a bit, then drift closed, over and over. There wasn't any wind that I could feel. The trees were still. The porch flag down the block hung straight down, but that gate kept moving. I watched it for maybe a minute. Crunch of a car rolling somewhere far off, a dog giving a single bark, and then nothing. I told myself the latch probably didn't catch all the way. Maybe it was on a slight slope, so gravity did the rest. It bugged me just enough that I grabbed my keys, walked across the road, and pushed the gate shut with my hand. The iron felt cool and a little rough. I lifted the latch, dropped it into place, and pulled to make sure it was snug, solid, no rattle, no sway. On my way back, I heard gravel crunch behind me. Like one more step that wasn't mine. I turned, expecting to see someone on the sidewalk, but the road was empty. The cemetery was quiet. The insects went silent for a second, then started up again, like somebody hit pause and then play. I told myself it was just my boot on a loose rock, and I went back inside. A couple days later, Tyler came home from a late shift. I was half asleep on the couch with the TV low. He kicked off his boots, walked over to the window, and stared out at the cemetery for a minute. "You ever hear anybody over there at night?" he asked. I sat up. "Like what? Teenagers?" He frowned, the kind of frown where he's trying to decide if he's about to sound dumb. Sounded more like, I don't know, like kids whispering, but not playing, just saying stuff. Could have been the plant, I guess. Echo or something. "You're hearing voices from the plant now?" I said. He laughed it off, but he kept looking at those trees along the back fence. The oaks with the moss hanging down so heavy it almost touched the ground in some spots. "Coming past there, right before our road," he said. "I thought I heard my name, like clear, from that back row. That's stupid, I know." I told him it was probably the radio in his truck or somebody on a porch with their kid. The road curves a bit, sound bounces weird. I said it without thinking, because that's how I handle stuff like that. If there's a normal answer, that's the one I pick. The next weekend, I decided to do a video on the cemetery. It made sense. It was right there, and I'd been putting it off. I told myself I was just filming some B-roll and maybe a walkthrough, nothing dramatic. I grabbed my little audio recorder too, mostly out of habit. I went over in the late afternoon first, just to see the layout. The gate latch stuck a bit, like it caught halfway, and then gave with a clank. The gravel path crunched under my shoes. Near the front, everything was tidy. Plastic flowers, some newer headstones with recent dates. The deeper I went, the more the place started looking its age. Stone angels with missing noses and hands. Names worn down, lichen covering years. The broken angel in the center was worse up close. One wing gone, face smoothed away, hand reaching out with no fingers. Behind it, clustered on either side of the path, were a bunch of old family plots, Same surnames over and over. Behind those, it got messy. Grass taller. A couple of stones tilted so far they were almost flat. And at the very back, right up against the iron fence, stood that row of oaks. They were huge, bark dark and ridged, roots pushing up the ground around them. Spanish moss hung from their branches in long, gray ropes, swaying a little even though there wasn't much wind. The ground back there felt uneven, like the earth had settled in strange ways. There were a few stones, but there were also just depressions in the dirt that looked like graves with no markers. That night, after Tyler left for his shift, I went back with the recorder. I told myself it would just be for fun, walk the path, ask a few questions to the empty air, see if anything weird turned up on the playback. The temperature dropped a little after dark. Not cold, just a degree or two cooler than the house. When I stepped onto the porch, the wood creaked under my weight, and the porch light hummed and then flicked a bit before settling. Across the road, the cemetery looked flatter, like everything inside it got compressed by the dark. The only clear shapes were the top of the broken angel and the line of oaks. I crossed the road, feeling the gravel under my sneakers, and pushed the gate open. It gave that drawn-out squeal that makes you think of horror movies. But that's just what old gates do. Insects buzzed in the grass, then went quiet as I passed, then started again behind me. I walked straight to the back row, under the oaks. The moss above me moved slightly, even though the air around my face felt still. I turned on the recorder, held it up, and felt kind of stupid. "Okay," I said quietly, keeping my voice calm in case anyone in a nearby house had their window open. "This is Evan, just doing a quick test recording. If there's anybody here who wants to say something, I guess go ahead." I stood there for a full minute, maybe two. Nothing but the faint hum of distant traffic. A dog barking once and then shutting up. Some insect clicking in the grass and then stopping. A leaf scraped down the trunk of a tree somewhere behind me. That was it. I walked the fence line, passing a couple graves so worn I couldn't read them. In one spot, right between two roots, there was a long dent in the earth with no stone at all. Just a sunken patch, like something underneath had collapsed. I made a note into the recorder about how weird it was. There wasn't a marker. When I went back inside and listened to the audio, most of it was boring. My shoes on the gravel, my own breathing, little pops from the mic when I turned my head. Then I got to the part where I'd first introduced myself. I heard my own voice say, "Okay, this is Evan, just doing a quick test recording. If there's anybody here who wants to say something, I guess go ahead." A few seconds of silence. Then, very faint, like it was behind the static, I heard someone whisper my name. "Evan." The word was soft, but it was there. Not drawn out, not dramatic. Just my name in a low, breathy voice. I replayed it a few times, adjusting the volume, trying filters. It almost sounded like my own voice pitched down, but I knew I hadn't said it again. I sat there in the dim living room with my laptop open, porch light flickering through the blinds, and told myself it was just noise. The human brain loves patterns. You can hear words in anything if you want to. I didn't mention it to Tyler right away. It felt dumb, like I was trying to hype my own content. The next night, though, he walked in looking uneasy. He took off his boots a little too fast, like he couldn't wait to be inside. "They're messing with people over there?" he asked, nodding toward the cemetery. "What do you mean?" "Somebody was by the fence when I drove past," he said. "Like right by those big trees. I just caught them in my headlights. Looked like they were hanging, but that can't be right. Probably just the moss, but I don't know. I slowed down and they weren't there anymore. I'm probably just tired." I thought about the audio. "Could have been the moss," I said. "You know how it hangs. Headlights make shadows do weird stuff." He nodded, but he checked the deadbolt on the front door twice that night. The next time I went back with the recorder, I brought a better mic. I told myself I was testing equipment. That was it. I went earlier in the evening, so it wouldn't feel like a cliche. The sun was low, casting everything in that flat orange light. At the back row, under the oaks, I stood near that unmarked depression again. The moss above me shifted slowly, brushing each other with this dry, whispering sound. I hit record. "This is Evan again," I said. "Back at Spanish Moss Cemetery, just seeing if any of that noise from before repeats." I walked a slow circle around the tree. Gravel crunched under my feet, then turned to soft dirt. The air felt cooler in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Not freezing, but like I'd stepped into shade that wasn't really there. "Just for the record," I said, "I live right across the road. So, if you've got anything to say, I'm probably around." Nothing happened that I could see. The trees didn't move. The ground didn't shake. A crow called somewhere off to the left. A car passed on the main road, sound muffled by the houses. I turned to leave and felt, just for a second, like something was right behind me. You know that feeling when you're sure someone's standing too close in a line? My shoulders tightened on instinct. I turned around fast, heart kicking up, but it was just the trees. Moss hanging, stones tilted. When I listened back that time, there were more whispers. Not clear words at first, just little shapes of sound that almost formed syllables. I cranked the volume, put on headphones, and sat very still. At the part where I said I lived across the road, there was a pause. Then a voice, closer to the mic than mine had been, whispered, "We know." I paused the file, took the headphones off, and sat back. The house was quiet, except for the fridge, humming, and the occasional knock from the radiator. I could see the glow of the porch light under the curtains. I told myself somebody must have been in the cemetery that I didn't notice. Sound carries. Maybe a neighbor had their TV on. Maybe a kid walked by on the sidewalk. That was a lot more likely than someone in the ground answered me. I repeated that to myself a few times, just to be sure I believed it. Over the next couple weeks, small things started happening around the house. The front motion light would come on at random, even when no cars passed and no one walked by. Once or twice I checked, thinking Tyler might be home early, but the porch was empty. Nothing but moths bumping the glass. We'd find dirt in weird places. Little smears of it on the inside of the back door, for example. Just above the knob, like someone with a dirty hand had reached for it. I blamed Tyler's work boots. He swore he always kicked them off on the porch. We argued about it for a minute, then dropped it. One night, around 2 a.m, I woke up because the house felt wrong. Not noisy. The opposite. Too quiet. The AC had cycled off, and for a second, it was like my ears were straining for something. Anything. No crickets, no distant cars, no wood popping. Just this flat, heavy silence I could feel in my chest. Then, faintly, through the bedroom wall, I heard my name. Evan. It wasn't loud, but it was close, like someone was standing in the hallway. The tone was almost conversational. Not angry, not pleading, just acknowledging. I froze. "Tyler?" I called, because that's the only thing that made sense at that point. No answer. I reached over, fumbled for my phone, and saw a text from him from an hour earlier. "On overtime, won't be home till 4. The hall light was off when I opened my bedroom door. The air felt cooler outside my room than in it. I walked down the hall, bare feet on the old wood, every board announcing my weight. The living room was empty. The couch, the coffee table, the cheap lamp, everything exactly where it should be. The porch light was on, casting that yellowish stripe across the floor. The back door, though, the one we always made sure was latched because it stuck, was open about an inch. Just enough for a thin line of night air to slide in. I watched the curtain move slightly, like someone's breath was coming through the gap. I closed it, checked the lock twice, and went back to bed without turning off any lights. The next morning, there were faint muddy footprints on the kitchen floor. Not full prints, just smudges, leading from the back door to the edge of the hallway. They sort of faded out there. When I pointed them out, Tyler insisted they weren't his. "You think I came in here at 3 a.m. and tiptoed around in the mud?" he said. "Come on, man." I cleaned them up and told myself we must have tracked that in earlier and just not noticed. Old dirt, old smears, that was all. At some point in all this, I went to the county records office for a totally normal reason. I needed to look up property stuff for my landlord's form, nothing dramatic. While I was there, I figured I'd ask about the cemetery because it felt like a harmless side quest. The woman at the desk was older, gray hair pulled back, glasses on a chain. Friendly in that guarded small-town way. I asked if there were any records on Spanish Moss Cemetery, just general history. "Why?" she asked, not unkindly, but with that careful note in her voice. "I live across from it," I said. "I do some filming, local history stuff, just curious." She typed for a minute, then frowned at the screen. "We've got partial records," she said. "Some of those older graves back there, they don't have proper entries. There's a note about relocation and unmarked burials along the fence line. Flooding, I think. A lot of things got moved that shouldn't have been moved, or moved without markers. It was a mess." "Relocation?" I repeated. "Like they dug people up and put them somewhere else?" She pressed her lips together. "That's what it says," she said. "But not everything written down matches what actually got done, if you know what I mean." "Anything about the trees, besides those big oaks in the back?" She looked over her glasses at me for a second. "You don't want to go digging too far back into that," she said quietly. "Those graves aren't what you think they are." "What are they then?" I asked. She shook her head, already closing the file. "Paperwork's incomplete," she said, almost too fast. "Happens a lot with older sites. If I were you, I'd leave it at that." On my way out, I passed a bulletin board with old photos of the town. In one of them, black and white and grainy, I could make out the cemetery, the same iron fence, the line of oaks. There were shapes hanging from the branches. Hard to see what they were, lanterns maybe, or something else. Someone had pinned a strip of paper over the bottom half of the photo, covering whatever caption had been there. Back at home, I dug through the lease packet my landlord had given me. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe I just needed to focus on paper and ink and numbers again. There was a photocopy in there, some half-illegible list of previous owners. My landlord had scribbled notes next to some names. One near the top of the page caught my eye because it looked a lot like mine. Same first name, same last initial. The date next to it was 1879. Instead of an address, someone had written "Lot opposite cemetery" in faded script. That night, I didn't plan on going back over there. I really didn't. But around 11, Tyler headed out for a late shift, and I found myself standing on the porch again, staring at the oaks. The porch light hummed and flickered once. The air was still. I told myself I just wanted one more recording, something I could analyze and prove to myself it was all in my head. That was it, a control sample. That's how I justified it. I crossed the road, shoes crunching on the gravel. The insects went quiet as I reached the gate, then started again behind me after I passed through. I walked straight down the path, past the broken angel, through the thicker grass, until I reached the back row. Under the oaks, it was darker, even with the sky clear. The moss blocked a lot of the starlight. It hung in thick strands that brushed each other lightly when they moved, making that dry, whispering sound again. I could smell damp earth and something else, kind of metallic but faint, like old nails. I stood near the unmarked depression, turned the recorder on. The red light blinked. My hand shook a little more than I wanted to admit. "Last one," I said quietly. "This is Evan. I just want to, I don't know, understand what I've been hearing. If that's you on the recordings, I need you to know I don't mean any harm by it. I live across the road, that's all." The ground felt like it gave a little under my feet. not a full-on shake, just a soft, slow shift, like the dirt was settling deeper. I felt it through the soles of my shoes and up into my knees. Above me, the moss started to sway, not in time with any wind I could feel. The air around my face was still, no breeze on my skin, but the moss moved in long, slow arcs, first one way, then the other, as if something invisible had brushed past it. I stared up, squinting. For a second, I could have sworn there were shapes in the mess of it. Not solid, exactly. Just darker patches, roughly the size of people, hanging there. My brain tried to make them into coats, or trash bags, or anything other than what they looked like. I blinked, and all I saw was moss. On the recording, though, my breathing got louder. I heard myself say, "Okay, I'm going to head out now," in this weird, careful tone I don't usually use. On top of that, very close to the mic, there was another breath that wasn't mine. I didn't know that then. All I knew was that as I turned to leave, I heard a sound behind me like something heavy dropping from a height and hitting soft ground. Not a thud, exactly. More like a muffled impact, dirt shifting, roots protesting. Then there was the sound of movement, not footsteps. Something lower to the ground, scraping along the surface. Fast. Like elbows digging in, knees dragging. Moving toward me. I didn't run, I don't know why. Every part of me said, run, and I just walked. Steady, not looking back, forcing my steps to stay even. Gravel started under my shoes again after the soft dirt, and that noise behind me eased off. I told myself it was an animal, a dog, maybe. A raccoon. Something that dropped from a low branch and scurried away. At the gate, my hand slipped on the iron latch. It felt damp, though there hadn't been any rain. My palm came away with a smear of dark dirt. I wiped it on my jeans, went back across the road, and locked the door behind me. When I finally listened to that recording, I did it in full daylight. Tyler was asleep after a shift, and I sat at the dining table with my laptop, coffee, and the blinds open. Sunlight on the floor, cars passing occasionally. Normal stuff. Most of it was like before. My footsteps, my breathing, the occasional distant car. But near the end, when I said I was going to head out, something changed. The background noise dropped out. No insects, no far-off traffic. Just this low, almost inaudible hum. Then, right next to my own voice, another voice whispered my name. Only this time, it sounded exactly like me. Same tone, same way of saying it, as if I'd leaned in and recorded myself over myself. Evan, it said. The hairs on my arms lifted. I replayed it. Same thing. I tried shifting the pitch, checking the waveform, everything I knew how to do. The pattern was too clean. It didn't line up with any echo or replay. It was like someone had copied my voice and dropped it on top of the file. Later that day, I ran into our next-door neighbor, Ms. Martha, while taking out the trash. Older woman, widowed, always out front with her plants. She glanced across the road as I rolled the bin to the curb. "You've been spending a lot of time over there," she said, not accusing, just noticing. "Yeah," I said. "I do a little video thing, history, local stories, that kind of stuff." She watched me for a second. The breeze picked up just enough to stir the leaves in her potted plant. Across the road, the moss in the oaks moved, even though the lower branches didn't. "Some places don't like their stories told," she said quietly. "You might want to think about leaving that one alone." I forced a half smile. "You think it's haunted?" She didn't smile back. "I think not everybody over there got put in the ground the way they were supposed to," she said. "And not everybody in the ground stayed there. You hear something, you don't answer." That's how we were raised. That night, Tyler came home early for once. I was in my room, scrolling through files, trying to decide whether to delete everything. I heard the front door open, his boots hit the floor, then his voice call my name from the living room. "Evan," I answered without thinking. "Yeah?" He didn't say anything else. I walked out into the hall, expecting to see him throwing his stuff on the couch. But the living room was empty. Front door shut, deadbolt latched. His truck wasn't in the drive when I checked the window. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Tyler flashed on the screen. "Just started my shift. You good?" I stood there in the hallway, lights on, house quiet, and just stared at that message for a long time. The next morning, I found dirt again. This time it was on the inside of the front door, around the knob, in little smears like someone had been trying different ways to open it. A single faint mark was lower than the others, about where a smaller hand would reach. I wiped it away. I thought about calling the landlord or the police or somebody and saying, "I think someone's breaking into my house," but also they're not leaving footprints on the porch. There wasn't a good way to say it that didn't make me sound crazy. I never did upload the cemetery video. The files are still there, sitting in a folder on my hard drive. But I stopped opening them. I know what's on them. I know what it sounds like when something I can't see uses my own voice to talk back to me. Sometimes at night, the motion light still comes on for no reason. If I get up and look through the blinds, I don't see anyone on the porch. But every so often, if I look past the street, toward the cemetery, I'll notice fresh flowers on one of the older graves. Not the newer ones near the gate, the ones way in the back, where the grass tries to swallow the stones. There's one spot in particular, near that unmarked depression, where someone keeps leaving them. White flowers, mostly. They're never wilted. I've never seen anyone place them there. I haven't walked back, look under those oaks again. I tell myself it's because I'm busy, because life got in the way, because the channel isn't a priority right now. Truth is, I don't need more proof of anything. I've got enough unanswered questions as it is. Every now and then, usually around 3 in the morning, the house will get very quiet all at once. The fridge hum drops, the AC cycles off, the insects outside pause. In that little pocket of silence, I can hear my own breathing and the faint creak of the wood under the bed. And sometimes, right at the edge of that silence, I hear someone say my name in my own voice from somewhere I can't put my finger on. I don't listen to the recordings anymore. I don't ask the neighbors what they remember about those trees. I stopped digging through old records, trying to see if that 1879 name was really mine or just close enough to scare me. I stopped asking whose name that is. My name is Megan, and I'm from Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. I always feel like I have to explain that Wellsboro is real. People from outside the area think I'm making it up when I say there's a town with gas lamps on Main Street and a little brick courthouse that looks like it belongs on a postcard. It's small, kind of tucked away in the northern part of the state. You drive a few minutes out of town, and it's just trees and hills, and that deep, quiet kind of dark you only get in the country. I moved back a couple of years ago after bouncing around for school and a couple of not great jobs. Right now, I work as a medical billing clerk for a clinic over in Mansfield. It's not glamorous or anything, but it's steady, and I'm one of those people who doesn't mind staring at numbers and codes as long as I've got coffee and my headphones. I work mostly daytime hours, 8 to 4, Monday through Friday. The job kind of bleeds together after a while. Days all looking the same, except for whatever song I've got stuck in my head. I couldn't afford a place on my own, so I ended up splitting an old rental house with a coworker who needed a place. Her name is Jill. She does front desk and scheduling at the same clinic. We weren't close before, just friendly enough to chat at lunch, but she mentioned she was looking for a room, and I mentioned I was looking for help with rent, and it went from there. The house is a narrow 2-story place on a side street, a little crooked, with floors that creak if you even think about walking. The landlord said it was built around 1900, give or take, which checks out because nothing in that place is quite level. The house sits directly across from a cemetery. That's the part people always react to. Our front windows look out over this compact Victorian-era cemetery. Just a small patch of land, maybe a couple acres at most, tucked between our street and a line of trees. It has one of those old black iron fences with curled tops, the kind that would hurt like hell if you fell on it, and a simple gate they lock at dusk. Near the entrance, it's actually really neat and cared for. Short grass, gravel path, a few little bushes somebody trims, and a row of headstones that all more or less stand straight. If you walk farther back though, past where the path curves, it gets different. The grass is longer, kind of patchy. The stones tilt at odd angles. You start to see where the ground has settled and some of the graves are sunken a bit. A lot of the markers in that back half are from the late 1800s, 1870s, 1880s, with carved names half worn off and dates that take a second to read. There are a bunch of family plots with the same surname on 2 or 3 stones in a row. And then there's this one grave, set a little apart from everything else, close to the fence on our side. It's not dramatic or anything, just a single headstone, older than most, with a last name I didn't recognize when we first moved in. When I signed the lease, I honestly liked the idea of being across from a cemetery. It sounded quieter than being near a bar or some student housing. My mom made a face when I told her, but I said, "Dead neighbors don't throw parties." And she rolled her eyes. At first it was peaceful, almost comforting in a weird way. On Saturday mornings, I'd sit on the couch with my coffee, look out the front window, and watch squirrels run along the fence or birds hop on the stones. In the summer, when I had the windows cracked, you could hear the little crunch of gravel when someone visited, the low murmur of voices, and then the car doors closing and the sound drifting away again. Jill joked about it more than I did. She'd say stuff like, "If anything starts rattling chains over there, I'm moving out." Or she'd wave at the headstones and say, "Morning, neighbors," on her way to work. She has that kind of personality where everything's a bit. She's not dramatic, exactly, but she likes to poke at things. She'd stand at the kitchen sink at night, doing dishes, looking out the side window toward the fence, and say, "If we ever see something move over there that isn't a squirrel, we sell everything and go." I'd just say, "You can't even afford a new car, Jill." And she'd laugh. That was the rhythm. Get up, shower, drive to the clinic, stare at claims and codes, come home, wave automatically at the cemetery out of habit. In the summer, it would still be light when I got back, and I'd see a couple of older folks walking along the gravel path, or somebody tending a grave near the front. In the winter, it was already dark at 5, and all I'd see was the glow of the street lamp reflecting off the iron fence and, sometimes, the faint shape of the gate, if there was snow. The first small thing started with that gate. It's just a simple iron gate that swings inward and latches with a bar. There's a sign on it with the cemetery's name and the hours. And it clearly says the place closes at dusk, which is something like 6 in summer and earlier in winter. Officially, the town maintains it. Unofficially, I think it's mostly the same couple of people from the little church down the street, because I always see the same 2 cars when someone is mowing or trimming. Anyway, one morning I was leaving for work around 7. It was early fall, the air just cool enough that you could see your breath, and there was this kind of thin fog hovering low over the grass in the cemetery. Nothing dramatic, just that white band you sometimes get. I locked the front door, turned around, and noticed the gate was wide open. The lock chain was hanging on one side, and the gate was pulled all the way back like someone had left it that way on purpose. I remember thinking it looked wrong because I'd never seen it open like that. Usually when someone goes in, they swing it just enough to slip through and then pull it back behind them. I figured maybe whoever locked up the night before forgot, or the chain didn't catch. I stood there for a second, listening. It was quiet. No cars coming down the street, no voices, just the distant hum of a truck on the main road and a crow somewhere in the trees. My shoes made that scratchy sound on the little bit of gravel near our curb. When I came home that afternoon, The gate was closed again. I didn't see anyone around. I didn't really think much of it. A week or so later, though, it happened again. Same thing. Early morning, my breath in the air, gate wide open, nobody around. I joked about it to Jill that night while we were microwaving leftovers. Maybe they've got a graveyard sleepwalker, she said, poking at her food. Some old guy who goes to visit his wife and forgets to close the gate. Maybe it's just the town guys being lazy, I said. I don't know. She pressed her forehead to the window like a kid, looking out at the fence. If I see anybody walk in there before 6 a.m., I'm calling someone, she said. Then she added, or I'll just wake you up and make you look first. The gate thing could have stayed just that, a minor annoyance, if nothing else had started happening. But there were other little things. One evening when I got home a bit late, around 7, I noticed flowers on that one grave that's set apart from the others along our side of the fence. Not a big deal. People leave flowers, obviously. But these were fresh white daisies, really bright against the dark stone. And the grass around that particular grave was longer than the rest. It didn't look like anyone had been tending it. The other nearby plots had cut grass in little clippings, like someone had gone over them with a mower. And this one was just a bit shaggy. The daisies looked almost too clean, too new, sitting there by themselves. I told myself someone came by occasionally and only cared about that one grave. There's nothing strange about that. People fixate on one person. Still, I started noticing when the flowers changed. I'd see them while I drank my coffee, or when I was locking the door at night. One week it was daisies, then they were gone. Then there were these small red carnations. Never wilted, never half-dead supermarket bouquets. Just fresh, like they'd only been there a day or two. I never saw anyone bring them. We have a motion sensor light over the front door. The landlord put it in after someone tried the car handles on the street a couple years back. It faces toward the road, which means it also faces toward the cemetery. Most of the time, it only comes on when we pull in, or when someone walks their dog past the house. Every once in a while, it'll flick on for a stray cat. You get used to it. You see that sudden wash of light and you don't even think about it. But there were nights when it came on, and there was nobody. I'd be on the couch, half watching something on my laptop, and the light would blaze through the curtains. I'd glance up, expect to see a shadow move across the front window, and there would be nothing. I tried to convince myself it was bugs, or the wind shifting a branch. We've got a couple of spindly trees by the sidewalk. Maybe that was enough. Jill noticed it too. One night she said, "Your stupid ghost neighbors keep setting off the light again." And when I didn't laugh, she added, "You know I'm kidding, right?" "Yeah," I said. "It's probably just a big moth." She shrugged and went back to scrolling on her phone. The first time I heard what I thought was a voice, I was in the kitchen by myself. It was a Tuesday night. I remember because I'd just done this stack of claims that all came back with some error, and my brain hurt from staring at codes. Jill was at her sister's place in Williamsport. I had a pot of water boiling for pasta, and the kitchen window was cracked open a little to let the steam out. You can see a corner of the cemetery from that window if you lean to the side. The house was making its usual sounds, the low hiss of the radiator, the occasional tick from somewhere in the walls. Outside, I could hear one of the neighbor's dogs barking 2 streets over, and then, in between those sounds, this thin, drawn-out noise. It was so quiet, I almost missed it. It sounded like someone letting out a slow breath, or maybe like a person crying, but holding it back as much as they could. There was this little hitch in it, like a sob that never fully came out. I froze with the spoon in my hand and just listened. The pot was starting to bubble, and the steam hit my face. The sound came again, so faint I couldn't tell what direction it was from. It could have been the wind moving through the trees, or a TV in someone else's house, or even just my neighbor's pipes, but it didn't feel like that. It felt too, human. I flipped the fan on to drown it out. 10 minutes later, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. That's how it was with most of those early things. You hear something, you see something, you tell yourself you're tired. You focus on whatever's in front of you, work, laundry, bills, and let it slide into the background. I'm not someone who jumps to supernatural explanations. I wasn't telling ghost stories to myself. I just didn't want to think about it. Things started to feel different once I began noticing patterns. It was Jill who pointed out that the gate was always, somehow, open on mornings after the light had come on with nobody there. She said it offhand while we were brushing our teeth, both of us standing in that cramped little bathroom upstairs with the bad mirror. "Did you see it again this morning?" she asked, spitting into the sink. "See what?" "The gate. It was open when I left for work. That sensor light was going nuts last night around 3. I got up to pee, and it flashed on and off twice." "You got up at 3 in the morning?" I asked. "How do you even notice stuff at 3? "I had my glasses on, thank you," she said, annoyed. I looked out the window, nobody there, just the fence and the stupid fog. And then this morning, boom, gate wide open. I'm telling you, somebody's messing around over there. I thought about the way the light had woken me up too, how I'd seen the glow under my door, and told myself it was a car turning around. I hadn't actually checked. A couple of days after that, I woke up to the sound of our screen door creaking. It's an awful sound, sharp and long, like something out of a horror movie, except we're so used to it we barely register it anymore. I checked the clock. It was 5:12 a.m. The house was still dark, just that gray-blue, pre-dawn light slipping around the edges of the shades. I heard the door creak, then the quieter thump as it swung shut. I thought it was Jill leaving early. She sometimes picked up extra hours. I lay there for a second, then heard soft footsteps in the hallway, the slight groan of the floorboard near my door. "Megan?" Jill called, almost whispering. "Yeah," I said, my voice all rough. She didn't answer. The footsteps moved away, back toward the stairs. I heard the door creak again, then nothing. I rolled over, grabbed my phone, and saw I had a text from Jill from the night before. "Staying at my sister's again, don't wait up." That woke me up fully. I sat there listening, heart going a little too fast, but there was nothing else. The radiator hissed. A car went by on the street. Some birds started up outside. It was like the house swallowed the sound. When I told Jill about it later, she got quiet in a way she usually doesn't. "Maybe you dreamed it," she said. "I was awake," I said. I checked my phone. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something else, then shook her head. "You're freaking yourself out," she said. "It's that dumb cemetery. You're letting it get in your head." Maybe I was. I started closing the curtains more, not just at night, but sometimes in the evening, even if it was still light outside. I didn't like the feeling of looking up from my laptop and seeing the headstones out there, especially that one grave off to the side that always seemed just barely visible between the slats of the blinds. Around that time, I ended up at the town office for something normal. Our mailbox lock broke, and the post office told me I needed proof of residence to get it changed, which meant going to the borough building for some paperwork. It was one of those boring errands you put off until you've already lost 2 important letters. The woman at the front desk was the same one who's been there since I was a kid, Mrs. Kelly. She has that dry way of talking, like everything is mildly irritating, but she's also a little amused by it. I gave her my address and she typed it in, then paused for a half-second longer than felt normal, squinting at the screen. "Oh," she said. "That place." "What does that mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She shook her head. "Nothing. Just old. One of the weird ones tied into the cemetery parcel. You're across from St. Andrew's, right?" "Yeah," I said. "The little one with the iron fence." She clicked a few more times, printed the form, and handed it to me. I saw a map on the screen behind the counter for a second. Black lines and gray blocks. There was our street, and there was the cemetery. And I swear it looked like the line marking the cemetery boundary went straight under where our house would be. "Sorry," I said, pointing at the screen before I could stop myself. Does the cemetery line go under our place?" Mrs. Kelly's face changed. Not dramatically, just this small tightening around her mouth. She moved the mouse so the map scrolled up and away. "Old maps are messy," she said. "Lots of adjustments over the years. You're fine. Everybody's fine." "Okay," I said. I thought she'd leave it there, but as I turned to go, she added, "If kids ever start playing games in that graveyard, you call the police, not the borough. They're not supposed to be in there at night." "Yeah," I said. "I haven't seen any kids." She nodded, but she didn't look at me when she said, "You wouldn't." On my way home, I walked through the cemetery instead of going around it like I usually did. The gate was latched, but not locked, and it made that scraping sound when I pulled it open. Gravel crunched under my shoes, and the air was cooler inside the fence, shaded by a couple of big maples and a willow near the center. The breeze moved through the branches, making this soft, shushing noise. I followed the path around and then cut toward the back, to that separate grave I kept seeing from our front window. Up close, it was even more worn than I realized. The stone was gray, the edges rounded. Lichen covered parts of the letters. I had to lean in and trace them with my eyes to make them out. The first name was so faded it was just an M and maybe an A. The last name, though, was clearer. Halpern. I stood there for a minute, hands in my pockets, feeling weird for some reason I couldn't put my finger on. The flowers were there again, this time little yellow mums in a small pot. The soil in the pot looked dark and damp, like it had just been watered. There were no other footprints or fresh marks in the grass around that grave, just mine. "Someone loves you," I muttered under my breath, feeling stupid the second I said it. The wind shifted, and I heard the leaves scrape lightly against each other. And at the same time, far off, the sound of a train horn in the distance. Wellsboro doesn't see a lot of trains anymore, but you can still hear them at odd hours, echoing across the hills. That night, the light over our front door came on 3 separate times between midnight and 3. I know because I was awake for all of them. I'd gotten into this habit of lying in bed and staring at the line of light beneath my door, waiting for it. Every time it flared up, my stomach would clench. I never heard footsteps on the porch. I never heard a car, just the click of the sensor and the hum of the bulb. Around 2:30, I heard that thin crying sound again. It was clearer this time, a soft, steady sobbing that sounded like it was just outside, caught between the front of the house and the fence. I lay there with my hand over my mouth, listening. I told myself it was a drunk woman walking home from the bar or someone arguing on the sidewalk, but there were no words, just that low, rhythmic crying. It went on for maybe a minute, then stopped so suddenly it felt like someone had pressed a button. The next morning, when I went downstairs, there was dirt on the floor, just inside the front door. Not a lot, just a few smeared prints, like someone had stepped in with muddy shoes and tried to wipe them on the mat. They were half-formed, not clear enough to make out the tread. Jill was already at work. She'd left me a note saying she was running late and would text me. I stood there looking at the dirt, then opened the door and checked the porch. There was nothing out there. The air was cold enough to sting my nose. Across the street, the cemetery looked like it always did, a rectangle of frost-tipped grass and silent stones. The gate was closed. I swept up the dirt and tried not to think about it. Later that week, I was going through a drawer in the built-in cabinet in the dining room. It's one of those old wooden things with heavy drawers that stick. I was looking for a takeout menu, and instead I found a thin folder with a few old papers the landlord apparently never cleared out. There was an inspection form from before we moved in, some faded receipts, and one yellowed piece of letterhead from a funeral home in town that doesn't exist anymore. On that letterhead was a list of names and plot numbers. At the bottom, near the margin, was written Halpern family. Moved to East section. 1 marker remaining on old boundary. The handwriting was cramped and old-fashioned, but clear enough once you stared at it. I sat at the table with that paper for a long time, my coffee going cold in front of me. The wood of the chair creaked under me every time I shifted. Outside, a truck went past, and some loose piece of metal on it rattled. I could hear the faint sound of leaves scraping along the pavement out front. When Jill came home, I showed her the paper. She read it, then looked at me. "So what?" she said. "They moved some graves. They do that all the time. Like when they widen a road, right?" "It says 1 marker remaining on old boundary," I said. "That has to be that grave along our fence line. If they moved the bodies to the east section, why leave 1 stone there?" "Cheap?" she said. "Lazy? Who knows? Maybe the person didn't have family to complain about it. I mean, I get that it's weird, but it's also like 100 years ago. Whoever that is, they're not exactly watching us pay rent." She said it with a little smile, but it didn't quite land. That night, she slept with her bedroom door closed all the way for the first time since she moved in. Usually she leaves it cracked. The line between out there and in here kept getting thinner after that. More little things. A spoon left by the sink that I was sure I'd put in the dishwasher. A chair slightly pulled away from the table. My keys on the windowsill instead of in the bowl by the door where I dropped them every single day. One Saturday afternoon, I was home alone and decided to finally deep clean the living room. I moved the couch out from the wall to vacuum behind it. Underneath, in the dust and lost receipts, was a small dried flower, pressed almost flat. It looked like one of the daisies I'd seen on the Halpern grave weeks before. There's no logical way for a cemetery flower to end up under our couch. But I told myself maybe Jill had brought some flowers in at some point, and one fell. Even as I thought it, I knew that had never happened. Neither of us brings flowers home. That evening, I went back to the cemetery. I don't really know why. It was getting dark, the air kind of damp, and that half-light where colors start to drain out. The gate squealed when I opened it. The gravel crunched under my boots. I could hear a couple of kids laughing far off, maybe on another street, but inside the cemetery itself, it was weirdly quiet. Even the birds seemed to have shut up. I walked straight to the back, to the Halpern grave. The mums were gone. In their place was a single white carnation stuck right into the ground. No vase, no pot. The stem was green and firm. It couldn't have been there long. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing by another grave. But there was nobody, just the narrow rows of stones and the trees shifting a little in the wind. "Who keeps coming out here?" I said out loud. My voice sounded too loud in the stillness. I don't know if you've ever had that feeling where the air suddenly feels thicker, like the temperature drops a few degrees and your skin notices before your brain does. That's what it felt like. I heard a train horn again in the distance, longer this time, and at the same moment, the porch light on our house snapped on across the street. I watched the rectangle of brightness jump to life on our front door. No car had gone by. Nobody was on the sidewalk. When I turned back to the grave, there was dirt under my nails. I don't remember touching the ground. I started sleeping with a small lamp on after that. Not full light, just enough that I wouldn't wake up into complete darkness. The house made more noises than I remembered. The wood settling, the soft click in the radiator, the occasional scrape of a branch on the siding. The worst sound, though, was when the screen door creaked on its own. It didn't happen often, maybe once every couple of weeks, but every time it did, it lined up with a night when I'd heard that crying from somewhere near the fence. One night, I woke up because someone said my name. Not loud, not a shout, just a soft, steady Megan, like someone standing in the doorway trying not to wake me all the way up. I rolled over, squinting at the lamp, and saw the outline of my bedroom door closed tight. For a second, I thought Jill was on the other side. "What?" I said. "What do you need?" No answer. I got out of bed, the floor cool under my feet, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. Jill's door was closed, but I could hear her snoring. She's not subtle about it. The nightlight at the top of the stairs glowed this dull yellow, throwing weak shadows on the wall. I stood there for a minute, trying to decide if I'd dreamed it. From downstairs, I heard the soft creak of the screen door again. Then nothing, not even the usual ticking of the house. It was this flat, heavy silence. I didn't go down. I just stood there until my legs started to ache, then went back to bed and pulled the blanket up to my chin like a kid. I wish I could say something big and obvious happened after that, something that would make the story clean. It didn't. What I got instead was a slow accumulation of moments that didn't fit anywhere. I went back to the borough office a couple more times, with made-up reasons, just to see if I could catch the map on the screen again. Mrs. Kelly stopped letting me see it. She'd turn the monitor slightly or click out of that view. When I finally asked her straight out if graves had ever been under our house, she sighed like I was asking something impolite. "Property lines shift," she said. "People get moved, not always the stones. It's old ground up there. Some things just are where they are." "So there were graves," I said. She looked at me then, her eyes tired. "Those markers across from you?" she said. "They're not what people think they are?" "How do you mean?" She shook her head. "If you don't like living there, talk to your landlord. That's all I can tell you." I thought about the Halpern marker on the boundary. "Did the Halperns live in that house?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "You should go home. It's starting to snow." After that conversation, I stopped asking questions. It didn't feel like anyone was going to give me answers that would actually make me feel better. The realization, when it came, wasn't some dramatic moment. It was Jill, of all people, half asleep on the couch with an old box of mail in her lap. Our landlord had finally cleared some stuff from the basement, and we were sorting through it to see what belonged to the house and what was just trash. Most of it was junk, but at the bottom of one box, there was a battered file folder labeled with our address. Jill pulled out a stack of papers and flipped through them. "Hey, check this out," she said, handing me a piece. "Your twin." It was a photocopy of part of an old deed, blurry in places, but one line showed a name. "Transfer from estate of M. Halpern to," followed by our landlord's name. The date was from the 1970s. "M. Halpern," I read. "Like the grave." "Yeah," Jill said. "That's the point. Maybe he was the previous owner." I looked closer. The M on the deed had a faint, looped tail, just like the M carved into the stone I'd traced with my eyes. The middle initial on another page was different, but the last name matched. It wasn't proof of anything, not really. People reuse names, families move around. But the idea settled in my stomach and wouldn't leave. If the Halpern grave was a marker left behind after the bodies were moved, and the deed talked about the Halpern estate tied to this property, then maybe Mrs. Kelly was right. Maybe not every burial was where the stone said it was. Maybe this house was part of the ground that used to belong to them, and the line where the cemetery ended on paper was more of a suggestion than a fact. After that, every small thing felt heavier. The dirt by the door, the crying outside that sometimes sounded closer than it should, the way my name seemed to show up in the quiet, not loud, just like someone testing how it felt to say it. I didn't move. I still haven't. Moving takes money and energy, and a level of certainty I don't really have. Instead, I adjusted. I stopped walking through the cemetery unless I had to. I started ignoring the light when it came on at odd hours, even if it woke me up. I swept the floor a little more often. I stopped asking Jill if she'd moved my keys. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I sit on the couch and watch the cemetery through a gap in the curtains. You'd be surprised how much you can see if you sit in the dark long enough. The iron fence looks like a line drawn with a shaky hand. The trees sway just enough in the wind that you think you see someone moving between the stones. Every few days, flowers appear on the Halpern grave. Sometimes daisies, sometimes carnations, sometimes just a single stem stuck into the earth. I never see who brings them. I've stopped looking out the window when the light comes on, because it's easier that way. I tell myself there's a simple explanation for all of it. Someone in town still cares about that grave. The sensor is faulty. Old houses make weird noises. Somewhere in the chain of ownership, the name on the deed and the name on the stone crossed paths, and that's all. I tell myself those things, and most days I almost believe them. But I check that grave every time I walk past, without even meaning to. And no matter what day it is, no matter what the weather's been like, the flowers on that grave are always fresh. My name is Caleb, and I'm from Stillwater, Minnesota. I always feel weird saying that out loud, like I'm introducing myself at some support group or something. But that's where this all happened, so it matters. Stillwater's one of those pretty river towns people drive to for the weekend. Old brick downtown, antique shops, tourists taking pictures of themselves with ice cream. If you just saw the postcards, you'd think nothing bad ever settled there. I work as an insurance adjuster, which is a long, boring way of saying I spend my days looking at people's bad luck and putting numbers on it. Hail damage, basement floods, slip and falls in grocery store parking lots. I sit at a desk most of the time, or drive out to small houses with sagging porches and take pictures of cracked siding. I got used to walking around people's messes without really feeling anything about it. You can't do this job if you get lost in every story. About 2 years ago, my cousin Josh moved in with me. He'd gotten a job at some small logistics company outside town, something with warehouses and truck schedules. We grew up together but drifted apart after high school, like everybody does. When he said he was headed my way and just needed a place for a few months, I said yes before I thought about it. I had the space, and honestly, the house had been too quiet. The only weird thing about the place, at least at first, was what was across the street. The house faces this tiny old cemetery, more a pocket-sized patch of ground than a real graveyard. If you stand on my front porch and look straight ahead, it's right there. Maybe 50 stones at most, jammed into a narrow rectangle of land between 2 maples and a crooked sidewalk. It's from the Victorian era. At least that's what the little metal plaque says. Most of the dates are late 1800s, early 1900s. There's an iron fence around it, about waist high, black paint mostly flaked off. Near the front, by the sidewalk, it's neat. Someone, maybe the city, mows that part. There's a gravel path that goes straight down the middle from the gate to a little circle area with a broken angel statue. Past that, though, the grass gets higher and the stones lean into each other like they're tired. Out toward the back, the ground dips and rises in this uneven way that makes you feel like you're walking over something you shouldn't. I never thought much about cemeteries. This one was just background. The kind of thing you stop seeing after a while. When I first moved in, I figured it was a little creepy, but also kind of peaceful. There are these small lamb carvings on some of the children's stones, and a lot of them share the same death year. 1893 pops up more than it should. But again, in this line of work, you develop a tolerance for bad years. Our house itself is small, 1.5 story, cream siding that needs repainting. The porch light over the front steps has always had a slight flicker to it, like it's thinking about going out, but never quite does. The front screen door squeaks when it closes, this high little whine I kept meaning to oil. You can hear everything at night, the wood in the walls settling. An occasional truck on the main road a couple streets over. Dogs barking up the hill. When the wind comes in off the river just right, you hear the leaves scraping along the pavement in front of the cemetery, like they're being pushed back and forth over the same spot. Josh joked about the cemetery on his second day. We were sitting on the porch with cheap beer, watching the sun drop behind the houses across the side street. The gravestones were just silhouettes then, short and uneven. "Man, you really went all in on the haunted house aesthetic," he said. "You get a discount on your mortgage for facing a graveyard." "It's not that bad," I said. "It's quiet neighbors." He laughed. "Yeah, until one of them decides to come over and borrow sugar." It was that kind of thing. Light, stupid jokes. It felt normal. The cemetery was just something to point at when the conversation stalled. We got into a routine. I was up at 6 most mornings. I'd make coffee, stand by the kitchen window, and look out over the sink. From there, you can see the cemetery at an angle. The iron gate stays closed usually, and the gravel path catches the early light, this pale strip cutting through the darker grass. Sometimes you'd see an old man walking his dog along the sidewalk, or a jogger. There was one woman who came every Sunday around 9, always to the same stone up front near the angel statue. She'd stand there with her head down for a long time, then leave a few flowers and go. I never got close enough to read the name. The first thing that felt off was small enough that I almost didn't notice it. It was a Thursday night in late fall, one of those evenings where the temperature suddenly drops and you realize you should have turned the heat on earlier. Josh was at work for a late shift, and I was on the couch with a blanket, watching some dumb show with the sound down low. At some point, the radiator in the living room knocked. It's old, and it does that, a loud clank that echoes. I muted the TV and listened to the house settle. Out of habit, my eyes went to the front window. It was full dark out there, just the pale cone of my porch light hitting the top of the iron fence and the nearest stones. The cemetery gate was open. I remember staring at it, trying to picture if I'd ever seen that before. The gate is one of those narrow iron things with a latch you have to lift and set back down. It usually faces the sidewalk straight on. That night it was swung inward, maybe halfway, like someone had just walked through and not bothered to close it. It was windy, so that's where my mind went. The branches in the big maple above were moving, leaves scraping along the ground. The screen door rattled a little in its frame. It was easy to imagine a strong gust working that latch loose somehow. I told myself that and turned the TV back up. The next morning, over cereal, I mentioned it to Josh. "Wynn probably did it," he said through a mouthful. "Or one of those high school kids. You know they love places like that." "Yeah," I said. "Probably." He grinned. "If it opens again tonight, I'm charging them rent." A few nights later, I woke up for no good reason. It was one of those slow, confused wakings where you don't know what time it is or why your heart is beating a little faster than it should. The room was cold. I could hear the old house making small noises, distant ticks, an occasional creak in the beams. And I heard a bell, not the sharp ding of a doorbell or some little chime. This was low and heavy, like the sound had to drag itself through the air. It rang once, just one long, drawn-out tone that seemed to come from outside, from somewhere across the street. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. Then I realized I was awake, really awake. The sound faded out, slow, like someone was damping the metal with their hand. I glanced at my phone on the nightstand. 2:14 a.m. I lay there, listening, waiting for it again. Nothing. Just the faint hum of the fridge downstairs and a car going by a few blocks away. After a couple of minutes, I talked myself into the idea that it was a train horn, maybe, distorted by distance, or some alarm in the valley. It didn't quite fit, but it was enough to let me roll over and go back to sleep. In the morning, over coffee, I said, "Hey, did you hear anything last night, like a bell?" Josh frowned, rubbing his eyes. Nah, I was out cold. What, like church bells? I don't know, I said. Just one ring, kinda deep. He shrugged. We got churches everywhere. Maybe somebody's testing something. Or maybe your brain's finally protesting all these spreadsheets. I laughed, but something about the sound stayed with me. It felt too close. A week after that, I came home from work and saw something new in the cemetery. This was mid-afternoon, sun still up, everything clear. The gate was closed. The grass up front looked freshly cut. And right by the broken angel statue, there was a little bouquet of flowers. Not the usual store-bought bunch either. These were wildflowers. Yellow and purple, stems wrapped in some kind of twine. They were placed in front of a stone I didn't recognize. That sounds dumb, I know. Who really recognizes specific gravestones across the street? But after enough mornings with coffee and that view, you start to get a sense of what belongs where. This stone was in the first row off the path, slightly to the right, kind of rectangular with rounded top corners. I was sure I'd never noticed it being decorated before. That Sunday, I watched for the regular woman from my kitchen window. She came at her usual time, went to her usual stone closer to the gate, and didn't even look at the wildflowers by the angel. I remember thinking maybe someone else had visited, or some group had come through while I was at work. It wasn't weird, just different. Still, I looked longer than I meant to, trying to read the name from across the street and failing. The second time I heard the bell, I was downstairs. Josh and I had fallen into this habit of staying up late on Fridays, talking about nothing. That night, we were at the kitchen table with a half-finished pizza between us. The back door was cracked open for some air, letting in the sound of crickets and the occasional car on the side street. Josh was midway through some story about a guy at the warehouse when the sound cut through. Same bell, same deep tone, like iron being struck hard and clean. It rolled over the crickets and filled the house for a second. Josh stopped talking and looked at me. "Okay," he said. "You heard that, right?" "Yeah," I said. My voice sounded thinner than I meant it to. We both listened, leaning a little toward the open back door. Nothing else came. The crickets started up again, like nothing had happened. "That's not a church thing," he said. "Too slow, and it's just once." "Could be some old bell down by the river," I said. "Somebody messing around." At 2 a.m, I glanced at the stove clock. It read 2:14 a.m. in its dim green numbers. Josh noticed too. "That's specific," he said. We went to the front door together, pulled it open, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold enough to see our breath. The porch light hummed, casting that pale cone over the iron fence and the first few stones. Everything looked normal. The gate was shut. The trees were barely moving. The street was empty. "You got any bells in there?" Josh nodded toward the cemetery. "I don't think so," I said. I'd never seen one. We stood there a little longer, listening. A dog barked somewhere up the hill. A car door slammed faintly a few blocks away. Finally, Josh shivered. "Well, if it's a ghost," he said, "it's punctual." We went back inside, but the time stuck in my head. I don't know why I decided to ask about it at the Historical Society. Maybe it was just an excuse to take a long lunch. There's a small brick building off Main Street with a little sign that says, Washington County Historical Society. Inside it smells like paper and dust, and that particular old book smell libraries get. A woman in her 60s sat behind the front desk, a pair of reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her name tag said, Karen. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yeah, I was just curious," I said. "About that small cemetery on Pine, across from 8th Street? I live across from it." Her face changed, just a little. Not fear, not confusion. More like she put another mask on top of her usual one. "Oh, the Pine Street plot," she said. "That's one of the older ones. Family plots, mostly." "I thought the big cemetery was up on the hill," I said. "It is," she said. "They moved most burials up there once that opened. but the old plots stayed. Was there ever a bell there? I asked. Like a bell tower or something? Her eyes flicked up from the counter to my face, then down again. Why do you ask? I thought I heard one, I said. The other night. My cousin did too, sounded close. Karen pursed her lips. There used to be a small iron frame at the back. Little bell they'd ring during services. Wind took the frame down in a storm before I was born. The bell cracked from what I've heard. They took it away. There's no bell there now. So if we heard something, probably the churches, she said quickly. Sound carries, or one of those apps kids use. They can make your phone sound like anything now. I nodded, even though it didn't feel like that was it. Do you have records on who's buried there? I asked. Just curious who I'm living across from. Some, she said, not all. The older ones can be incomplete, but you're welcome to look. She led me to a back room with metal filing cabinets. The light flickered once before settling. She pulled out a thin drawer labeled Pine Street Cemetery and set a folder on the table. Like I said, she said, not complete. Most of the pages were typed indexes, names, and dates. Some were scans of old handwritten lists. I flipped through them, noticing repeats of certain surnames. One column had death dates. I wasn't really sure what I was looking for until I saw it. On one line, Eleanor M.H., D. 2:14 a.m., Feb 12, 1893. The time jumped out at me more than the name. I glanced at a few other entries. Most didn't list a time. A few did. Midnight, 9:30 p.m., noon. That one felt like it had been written in with more care, like whoever did it had wanted it remembered exactly. Find something interesting? Karen asked from the doorway. Just looking at dates, I said. There are a lot of 1893 deaths. Influenza, she said. And some other things. Bad year. She stepped closer and very casually slid the sheet with the 2:14 a.m. entry underneath another. If you want more information, we have some pamphlets up front, she said. Tours too. In summer. There was something in her tone that made it clear we were done with that topic. I thanked her and left. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the bell and the time. I tried not to bring it up, but Josh saw me staring out at the cemetery through the living room window. Let me guess, he said. Our punctual ghost. It's not a ghost, I said automatically. He smirked. Right, it's just your new hobby, watching graveyards at 10 p.m. I told him about the records, about the broken bell. He laughed at the idea of a bell still ringing after it was hauled away. Maybe somebody stole it and is screwing with you, he said. Yeah, that's a lot of effort for a joke, I said. We stayed up later than usual. Around midnight, he went to bed. I stayed on the couch, not even watching TV by then, just kind of zoning out, listening to the radiator knock, feeling the house shift around me. The porch light flickered a few times like it always does, never quite committing. At 2:13 a.m., I realized I was counting seconds in my head. I felt stupid, but I couldn't stop. I watched the digital clock on my phone turn over to 2:14. Nothing happened. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and leaned back into the couch. My eyes drifted to the window anyway, out of habit. The cemetery was just a dark shape beyond the glass. Fence barely visible, stones only suggested by the way the porch light fell. I almost missed the sound. It wasn't the bell, not at first. It was the faint crunch of gravel, like a footstep on the path across the street. Just one, then another. Slow, evenly spaced, like someone walking barefoot on loose stone. The crickets outside went quiet. The hairs on my arms stood up. I got up and went to the front door, moving slower than I meant to, like I was underwater. I opened it carefully so the screen door didn't squeak too loud, and stepped out onto the porch. The cold air hit me in the face. I couldn't see anyone. The porch light lit the first few feet of sidewalk and the line of the iron fence. Beyond that, it was just darkness and the faint outline of stones. The wind wasn't even moving. It was that heavy kind of stillness you get before a thunderstorm, except the sky was clear. Then the bell rang. It was closer this time, or maybe just louder. The sound felt like it started somewhere in my chest and worked its way out. It rang once, slow and steady, and I swear I could feel it through the porch boards, under my bare feet. The iron fence seemed to pick up the tone and hum with it. When it faded, the silence rushed back in. No crickets, no dogs, nothing. I could hear my own breathing. I watched the cemetery gate, then the angel statue, then the back where the grass gets taller. Nothing moved. Behind me, I heard the floorboards creak inside the house. "Caleb?" Josh's voice, muffled. "You out there?" "Yeah," I said, not taking my eyes off the cemetery. "You heard that?" He came up behind me, rubbing his eyes, standing in the doorway. "Yeah, that was, yeah." We stood there for a long minute. Eventually, the crickets started up again, one by one, like they were being given permission. "Okay," Josh said finally. "That's enough for me. I'm not dying in Stillwater. I'm going back to bed." He tried to walk away like it was a joke, but his shoulders were tight. After that, things didn't explode or anything. Nothing dramatic. It was just small stuff, out of order. A damp footprint in the front hall on a dry night. The back door unlatched in the morning when I was sure I'd locked it. The porch light turning itself on even when I knew I'd flipped the switch off. One Saturday, I was cleaning the kitchen and I found muddy grit in a little half moon under the back door, like someone had pushed it open with their foot just enough to look in. Josh swore he hadn't been in and out that morning. Another time, I was on the phone with a client, pacing between the living room and the front hall. I kept hearing a faint metallic ring, not full, more like something lightly tapping metal from far away. It stopped when I stood still, started again when I walked. There's an old vent grate near the floor by the front door. I stood over it and listened. The sound was coming up through there, like someone was tapping on pipes. The cemetery stayed mostly the same. Gate open some mornings, closed others. I'd see new flowers once in a while, always by that same stone near the angel, even when the grass around it hadn't been disturbed by footprints. One day, I noticed two small stones I hadn't paid attention to before, set right next to each other. Same last name, same death year. I don't know if I was looking for patterns or if they were there already. What pushed me over the line was paperwork, which is funny considering my job. I was at my desk in the little office room upstairs, trying to sort out my own files for once instead of everyone else's. I found the folder from when I'd bought the house, old inspection reports, insurance forms, the deed photocopy. I don't remember seeing the original listing sheet before, but it was there, folded in half. The real estate agent had scribbled notes all over it. At the bottom, in a faint typewriter font, it listed nearby points of interest and mentioned the river, downtown, and Pine Street Family Cemetery, plot. That initial, H, matched the name I'd seen in the record at the Historical Society. The one with the death time, written carefully, 2:14 a.m. I flipped back through the cemetery index I'd copied that day and almost didn't notice the address column at first. There it was, next to the name. Residence 812 Pine. My address. I don't know how long I sat there with those papers in my hands. The house creaked around me like it always does. A chipmunk scratched at something in the gutter outside, then went quiet. Downstairs, I heard the front screen door give a little squeak, even though no one was scheduled to come by. When Josh got home that evening, I showed him the papers. "So what?" he said, frowning. "Somebody who lived here before is buried over there. That makes sense." "Yeah," I said. "I know, it's just the time, the bell, the name, the way she pushed the paper away at the Historical Society. Doesn't it feel like... I trailed off because I didn't actually know what I wanted to say. Like what? He asked. Like whatever's going on over there doesn't stop at the fence, I said finally. He didn't answer that. He just looked out the window at the cemetery for a long time, jaw tight, then changed the subject. That night, I woke up to the sound of my own name being spoken, soft, right next to my ear. Caleb. I snapped awake, heart pounding. The room was dark and freezing. For a second, I thought Josh had come in, but the doorway was empty. I could hear him snoring faintly through the wall in his room. The house was quiet otherwise. No wind, no traffic, nothing. Then from downstairs came the faint squeak of the front screen door opening, very slowly. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, every muscle locked. The urge to get up and check fought with the absolute certainty that I didn't want to. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Eventually, I heard the door squeak again, closing this time. The radiator knocked once, loud, like a period at the end of a sentence. In the morning, there were 2 small muddy prints on the inside of the front doormat, like someone had stepped in from wet ground, paused, and then walked away without leaving more. The prints weren't shoe-shaped. They were more like the heel and ball of a bare foot, smudged. I cleaned them up without saying anything. A couple weeks later, I went back to the Historical Society. I don't really know why. Maybe I thought more information would make things make sense. Karen wasn't at the front desk this time. There was a younger guy there, maybe late 20s, with a beard and a library of pens in his shirt pocket. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm looking for more info on the Pine Street Cemetery. I live across from it." He made a face. "Oh, that one. You know it?" "Everyone knows it," he said, then seemed to realize how that sounded. "I mean, it's one of the old plots." He led me back to the same filing cabinet. This time, there were a few more folders stacked on top. He pulled one out that looked newer, full of photocopied articles. "You might want to read this one," he said, tapping a page before handing it to me. It was a printout of some old column from a local paper, talking about the burial of a woman in 1893. It mentioned how the family insisted on holding the service at home, how the bell at the cemetery rang right when they brought her out of the house, even though no one had touched the rope. The article ended with a line about neighbors whispering that the dead don't like being moved. "Is there anything about the bell after they took it down?" I asked. The guy shrugged. "Stories. People say it still rings on certain nights. My grandma swears she heard it when her brother died, but the bell itself? That thing's gone." "Gone where?" He thought for a second. "My grandma used to say, not far enough, but you probably don't want to hear that if you live over there." I tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. On my way out, I asked him, "So what are those graves, really?" "Over on Pine." He hesitated. "Those graves aren't what you think they are," he said. "What does that mean?" He just shook his head. "Records are messy. People got buried in places they shouldn't have. Lines got crossed. We don't dig that far into it anymore." When I got home, I didn't go inside right away. I stood on the sidewalk across from the cemetery and really looked at it up close for the first time in months. The iron fence was cold under my hand. The gate latch was stiff, but moved when I lifted it. Inside, the gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked down the path. The air was colder between the stones, not by a lot, just enough to notice. The broken angel statue up front looked worse up close, its face worn smooth, one wing missing. The wildflowers I'd seen before were gone, but there were fresh ones there now, different kind, same spot. Stems still green, no wilt. I found the stone with the name from the record. The dates matched. Someone had recently cleared the grass around it, like with careful hands. There was no one else in the cemetery. Still, I had the uncomfortable feeling of being watched, like the way you feel when you stand in front of a window at night and know as somebody could see you if they were out there. The ground dipped under my foot near the back fence. And for a second, I thought it might give way. It held, just soft. I looked down and saw two small unmarked stones in a row, half sunk like teeth. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe some clear answer, maybe nothing. What I got was that same bell tone in my chest, except there was no sound, just the memory of it, so strong it felt physical. I left as quickly as I could without actually running. Life goes on. It has to. I still go to work. I still stand in other people's ruined kitchens and write down what I see. Josh still jokes, though less about the cemetery now and more about moving out someday soon. Like it's an idea that keeps circling but never lands. The bell doesn't ring every night. That's the worst part. If it did, you could get used to it. It comes maybe once every few weeks now, sometimes at 2:14, sometimes a few minutes before or after. Sometimes I hear it faintly in the walls instead of outside, like it's vibrating through the pipes. Sometimes it doesn't ring at all, but I wake up anyway, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling in the dark. A couple times I've woken to find the back door unlatched again, damp air pushing in, leaves scattered on the mat. Once there was a small white flower on the kitchen table that I know neither of us brought in. I've stopped asking questions at the Historical Society. I've stopped trying to match every name on the stones to a story. There's a point where knowing more doesn't help. It just gives the thing more shape. We talk sometimes about moving. Josh has almost enough saved, he says. I run the numbers in my head and know I could sell the place if I really tried. But then I think about the line on that old deed, about how this house and that patch of ground across the street are tied together on paper in ways I don't totally understand. And I keep thinking about something the guy at the Historical Society said, without saying much at all, about people being buried where they shouldn't have been, lines being crossed. Most nights, I just lock the doors, check them twice, and stand at the front window for a minute before bed, looking at the iron fence and the dark shapes of the stones. I listen to the wind in the maple branches, the scrape of leaves on the sidewalk, the way the insects go silent and then start again. I don't open the gate anymore. I don't go inside. I don't think it matters, but it feels like some kind of line. The fence was never meant to keep anyone out. My name is Gavin, and I'm from Hermann, Missouri. I always have to start there, because whenever I talk about this, people picture some big city thing, or some dramatic haunted mansion on a hill. It wasn't like that. I rent half of a small, beat-up white house on a sloping street across from a little pre-Civil War cemetery that you'd probably think was pretty if you just drove by in daylight. The place looks like something on a postcard when the leaves change. Low brick wall running around it, a simple metal gate at the front, and a gravel path that cuts straight through with old oak and maple trees leaning over the stones. Near the entrance, it's all neat. Trimmed grass, flags on veterans' graves, a couple of small family plots with the same last name on every stone. But the farther back you go, the more the ground tilts and the more the weeds and ivy take over. The back half looks like the town kind of forgot it. I live there with a coworker of mine, Melissa. She works down the hall from me at the office. I'm an insurance adjuster for a regional company, the kind that handles hail damage, fender benders, basement floods. Not exciting, but it pays on time. Melissa needed a place fast after her last roommate got married and moved, and I had an extra bedroom. We split the rent, groceries, and complain about claims over cheap coffee in the mornings. She's loud where I'm quiet, and she thought the cemetery across the street was weird, but kind of cool when she moved in. Our routine was pretty simple. I'm usually up first because I like the house quiet before work. I make coffee in this chipped blue mug, stand by the kitchen window, and look out at the cemetery while I wait for the kettle to boil. In the mornings, you can see the mist hanging low over the stones if it rained the night before. Sometimes a couple of crows hop around on the low brick wall, and you can hear chipmunks chattering in the bushes by the fence until a car goes by and they shut up all at once. There's a church down the road a bit. Their bells carry over the roofs and drift right through our windows if they're cracked open. The street itself is quiet. Herman isn't big, and we're a couple streets off the tourist stuff. We get a delivery truck rumbling through now and then, a distant train horn from across the river, and the occasional dog barking a few blocks away. At night, you can hear leaves scraping along the pavement when the wind picks up. And the wood in the house pops and settles with these soft little cracks that I stopped noticing after the first month. It's an old rental. The screen door on the porch sticks and then lets go with this sharp creak when you pull it. The porch light flickers if you don't screw the bulb in just right. All the usual little house annoyances. The cemetery was just part of the view. Kids cut through it on their way to the park in the afternoons. A couple of older guys walk their dogs along the path. On Sundays, there's usually at least one family standing by a grave near the front, holding flowers and talking in low voices. When my parents called and I mentioned I lived across from a cemetery, my mom said, "Oh, that would creep me out." But it really didn't. It was peaceful. There's traffic noise on the main street. We didn't have that. I'd sit on the porch step after dinner sometimes, listen to the insects, watch the last light fade off the stones. It felt quiet in a good way. Melissa used to joke about it. "We've got built-in neighbors who never complain," she'd say when the upstairs plumbing rattled. Or she'd stand at the window and say, "If we ever hear digging over there in the middle of the night, we're moving." That kind of thing. She'd get home later than me most days, drop her bag on the floor, kick off her shoes by the door, and go, "Any zombie activity today?" And I'd just shake my head and hand her the mail. It was a running joke. There was one grave I noticed early on, but not in a dramatic way. It's toward the back, right where the neat part of the cemetery gives up and the wild part starts. You can see it straight out our living room window if you're sitting on the couch. Most of the graves back there lean or sink a little, or they're half under ivy. But this one is set alone, just off from the little cluster of family plots that all share the same last name. The stone is simple, not one of the big obelisks or angel statues, just a tall, narrow marker. For some reason, the grass around it never got as messy as the rest back there. Not perfect, just less neglected. I filed it away as someone still visits that one, and didn't think more about it. The first odd thing was so small that I almost feel silly mentioning it. It was a windy night, early fall, leaves just starting to really come down. Melissa and I were both home. We'd watched some dumb show, turned it off around 10, and I went to lock the front door and check the porch light like I always do. The wind was moving the trees. You could hear the branches rubbing and see the shadows swaying over the low brick wall across the street. Our porch light flickered once, then steadied. When I glanced at the cemetery, I noticed the little metal gate was standing open. That gate is heavy. It drags a little on the gravel when you swing it, and it usually sits shut. There's no lock, but most people push it closed behind them. I'd seen teenagers leave it half open a couple times, but this was all the way wide. The wind was blowing across the street, not out of it, and the gate wasn't moving at all. It just stood there open, like someone had stepped through and never bothered to pull it shut. I remember saying, "Huh." Just that. Melissa called from the couch. "What?" And I said, "Nothing, they left the gate open." She joked, "You better shut it before somebody checks out." And I laughed and turned off the porch light. It felt like nothing. A few days later, I noticed flowers on that single grave in the back. Bright ones. It stood out, because most folks put plastic arrangements on the graves near the front that only get swapped out on holidays. But this was one of those simple glass jars, with real stems, set right at the base of the stone, yellow and white, fresh. I don't know flowers. Daisies, maybe. It caught my eye while I was grabbing my keys off at the coffee table one morning. I glanced up, saw that pop of color against all the brown and gray, and thought, yeah, someone definitely still visits that one. Over the next couple of weeks, I saw them again. Not the same flowers. They changed. The stems were always green. The petals never drooped. I kept telling myself whoever visited must come while I was at work, or early on weekends when I was sleeping in, and it didn't bother me. It was actually kind of nice to know somebody still cared about whoever was under that stone. Little things kept adding up. Our motion light over the porch started flipping on later at night. It's one of those cheap ones that kicks on when a car goes by, or a raccoon crosses the yard, so I didn't think much of it at first. But a couple of times, I'd be up in the kitchen getting water around 2 or 3, and I'd see the sudden wash of light spill across the low brick wall and the front row of graves. No cars going by, no dogs running, nothing. By the time I stepped to the window, the light would already be fading. Probably a cat, I told myself. Herman has plenty of strays. One evening, Melissa came in looking a little off. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and she dropped her bag and said, "Okay, you're gonna laugh at me, but that cemetery just weirded me out." I was paying a bill online at the little desk in the corner. I turned and said, "How?" She dug in the fridge for a soda while she talked. I parked down the block, right? I'm walking back, and I cut along the sidewalk by the wall like I always do. And I swear I heard somebody walking in there, like right on the other side of the wall from me, gravel crunching. But when I looked, there was nobody. No flashlight, no nothing. Just dark. It stopped as soon as I did. "Probably your own footsteps echoing," I said. "It wasn't though," she said. "It was like I stopped and it kept going for a couple more steps. Then nothing. It was just weird." I shrugged and said, "Sound bounces funny off brick. Wind moves stuff. You know how it is." She made a face but didn't argue. Later that night, she joked that our neighbors are restless, but she said it with this little edge in her voice. Once I started paying more attention, I noticed other small things. The insect noise outside would cut off sometimes when I stepped onto the porch. One second, there'd be this steady wall of crickets and whatever else lives in the grass. And then, like someone had hit mute, it would all just stop. I'd stand there, listening to the leaves skitter on the pavement and some dog barking far away, and look over at the cemetery trying to pick out what was different. The wind would move the trees on both sides of the street the same way. But the air over the stones just looked stiller, if that makes any sense. I'm not saying there was anything actually there. I'm just telling you what it felt like. We have this neighbor 2 doors down, an older guy named Carl, retired, always out raking or messing with his truck. He's one of those people who knows everything about everybody. I was out front one Saturday, sweeping leaves off the porch, when he wandered over to the edge of our yard with his rake and nodded at the cemetery. "You getting used to that view?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Honestly, it's nice. Quieter than the highway." He snorted. "Been there longer than the rest of us. Old Baptist ground, pre-war. Whole town used to be built around it." He pointed with his chin toward the back. "You see that odd one yet? The one off by itself?" I knew which one he meant. "Yeah, someone keeps it up, I guess." Carl's eyes flicked to me and then away. Somebody always does." He started to walk off, then stopped. "You ever got questions about that place? You go down to the Historical Society, not City Hall. Clerk down there don't like talking about it." "Why not?" I asked. He just shrugged, like the conversation had already gone too far. "Paperwork, mistakes, old stuff, nothing you need for your job, I'm sure." Then he changed the subject to property taxes and didn't come back to it. That stuck in my head, though. The next week, when I had a light day at the office, I took an early lunch and walked over to the little Historical Society building. It's this brick place that used to be a bank. Inside it smells like dust and old paper. and whatever polish they use on the wood floors. An older woman sat at the front desk, sorting files. Her name tag said Joyce. I told her I'd moved into the house across from the Baptist cemetery and was curious about its history. That was true. I didn't say anything about flowers or footsteps. She brightened up at first, started telling me about the founding families, the age of the oldest stones, the fact that some of the graves in the front row had been moved from an even older burial ground when the town expanded. She took me back to a metal filing cabinet and pulled a folder labeled Baptist Cemetery, Plats/Records. There were old maps inside, hand-drawn diagrams with plots numbered and names scribbled along each row. Joyce spread one out on a table and pointed. Here's the front gate. Here's the veterans section. Here's the original pastor's family. I traced my finger along the map, matching the squares in ink to the rows of stones in my mind. When I got to the back, something didn't add up. The little cluster of family plots I knew was there was on the paper, all with the same surname I'd seen from my window. But the single grave just off to the side wasn't marked. The space where it should have been was blank. No square, no name, no number. Just a little gap in the grid. What about this spot? I asked, tapping it. Joyce leaned in, adjusting her glasses. Which? Here, I said. There's a stone out there, about here. It's alone, kind of set apart. She stared at the map a little too long. Then she folded the paper in on itself, covering that area with her hand in a way that looked accidental but wasn't. These maps aren't perfect, she said. Some of the older burials weren't recorded properly. Do you have a list of names? I asked. Somewhere, she said. She stayed facing the cabinet. A lot of records from that period are incomplete. Flood in the records room back in the 40s. Mold. You know how that goes. She smiled, but it looked forced. I could tell she wanted me to stop asking. I had this weird feeling, like when you step on a stair that isn't there and your stomach drops, even though you don't fall. I thanked her and left it alone. That should have been the end of it. For a while, things went back to normal, or I convinced myself they had. The motion light, the flowers, the way the bugs went dead quiet sometimes. None of that is proof of anything. We went to work, came home, watched TV, paid bills. Normal life kept rolling. Then one night, whatever line there was between that place and the house started to blur. It was a Tuesday in late October. I remember because the air had that cold, damp feel to it, and you could smell wet leaves every time the door opened. Melissa was working late. I ate leftover stew and sat on the couch with a game on, not really watching. The radiator in the hall was knocking louder than usual, those hollow bangs that echo up the pipe. At some point, I dozed off. I woke up to the sound of the screen door creaking. Not slamming, just that slow, sticky pull it makes when somebody eases it open from the outside. For a second, I thought I'd dreamed it, but then I heard the soft click of the latch. No knock, no footsteps, just that. I sat up, heart beating a little faster, and listened. The TV was on mute. The room was dim. "Melissa?" I called. No answer. I got up and walked to the front door. The porch light was on, casting this pale cone over the railing and the top of the brick wall across the street. Through the glass, I could see the screen door sitting closed. I opened it anyway and stepped out. The wind pushed at my sleeves, and I could hear the leaves skating along the pavement, the distant honk of a train somewhere down by the tracks. The cemetery lay across from me, dark except for a little wash of streetlight near the front gate. Everything looked exactly the way it should. I told myself the sound must have been the wood settling, or the radiator, or some combination that tricked my brain. I went back inside, locked the door again, and went to get water. When I flipped on the kitchen light, I noticed there was dirt on the floor. Not dust, little clumps of dark, damp soil. They started near the back door, which we almost never use, and made a faint, broken line across the tile toward the hallway. The mud was smeared in a way that looked like someone had walked through it and then tried not to track too much, but didn't quite manage. I checked the lock on the back door. It was latched. The mat was clean. My shoes by the door were dry. I stood there, listening to the ticking of the kitchen clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. For some reason, the insects outside were silent. No crickets, no buzzing, just the wind in the branches and the dull thump of my heartbeat in my ears. "Okay," I said out loud, just to hear my own voice. When Melissa got home an hour later, I was still awake. I'd cleaned the dirt up, but I left a small smear I'd missed on purpose, half wanting to see if she'd notice without me saying anything. She came in, stomping a bit to shake off the cold, and set her bag down. "Hey," she said. "Did you come out while I was in the car just now?" "No," I said. "Why?" She frowned. "I thought I heard you say my name. Sounded like you, from the side of the house, like you were out back or something." "I've been inside," I said. "You sure it wasn't the TV?" "The TV isn't on," she said. She looked at the floor, saw the smear of dirt, and made a face. "Yuck, you been gardening or something?" I grabbed a paper towel and wiped it up. "I must have tracked it in earlier," I said. "Didn't notice." Neither of us pushed it. We were both tired. People hear things. Doors creak. Dirt gets inside. You can explain anything if you try hard enough. The next few nights, I slept worse. I'd wake up at odd hours for no reason, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house, the radiator knocking, the wood popping, the hum of the fridge, the occasional car tires hissing over wet pavement outside. Once, I woke up absolutely sure I'd heard the sound of gravel crunching under slow, heavy steps, like someone walking up the path in the cemetery. When I checked the clock, it was 3:07 a.m. I lay there, telling myself it was in my head, that even if someone was walking out there, it had nothing to do with me. Eventually, curiosity pushed me past, just looking through the window. On a Saturday afternoon, I walked over to the cemetery entrance. The gate squealed when I pulled it open, then dragged in the gravel. I stepped onto the path, and the crunch under my shoes sounded exactly like what I'd heard in the night. The wind was light, just enough to move the tops of the trees. The air smelled like damp earth and old leaves. I followed the path toward the back, passing the neat newer stones and the little flags and the occasional ceramic angel. The ground started to get uneven where the maintenance crew clearly didn't bother much. Grass grew higher. Vines twisted along the low brick wall from the inside. A crow called once from a branch overhead and then flew off. When I reached the family plots near the back, I slowed. All the stones had the same surname. A couple of small lamb carvings marked children's graves. Beyond them, just to the side, stood the stone I'd been watching for weeks. There were flowers there again. White this time, with a faint sweet smell. No wilt, no browning edges. The glass jar holding them was clean. No sediment at the bottom. The name on the stone was easy to read. The dates put the death in the 1940s. The last name matched the family plots nearby. The first name, that stuck with me. I won't say it here. It's not important to you. It was simple, old-fashioned. I remember thinking I'd never known anyone with that name in real life. I looked around, half expecting to see someone else there, but the place was empty. No fresh tire tracks on the lane that ran along the back. No footprints I could make out in the patchy grass. Just me, the low rustle of wind through branches, and the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere in town. On my way out, I passed the little bulletin board near the gate. There was a faded notice pinned there about volunteer cleanup days, and a handwritten note with a phone number. For questions about plots, call, and a name I didn't recognize. No mention of groundskeepers, no trespassing signs, nothing like that. It's public, more or less. People come and go, that's all I told myself. That night, the church bells rang the hour, and I counted them without meaning to. 10, then 11. Melissa went to bed. I stayed on the couch, staring at the TV without really watching, thinking about that blank space on the map and the way Joyce had folded the paper. At some point, I got up and dug through the drawer where we keep house stuff. Takeout menus, spare keys, the rental agreement. I pulled out the lease packet the landlord had given me when I signed. Tucked in with it was a photocopy of an older deed from before the current owner. The property description was the usual legal mess. But down near the bottom, there was a list of previous owners' names. The most recent few matched what I already knew. But farther up the page, one of the older names made me stop. It was the same last name as the family plots across the street, and the first name on the deed, the one who'd owned the house in the 1930s and 40s, matched the first name on that lone grave in the back. Same spelling, same everything. I just sat there at the kitchen table, the overhead light too bright, the refrigerator humming, looking back and forth between the paper and the mental picture of that stone. It doesn't mean anything by itself, right? People get buried near their houses all the time in old towns. The groundskeeper could have lived across the street. It actually makes sense if you think about it. I told Melissa the next morning. She was stirring sugar into her coffee, hair a mess, still waking up. So, fun fact, I said, trying to sound casual. This place used to belong to that family across the way. Which? She asked. The one with all the stones near the back, I said. And that one lone grave. The name on the house deed matches that one. She blinked at me, then looked out the window. You could see the top of the stone from where she was standing. So like, the guy buried over there used to live here? Looks like it, I said. That's weird, she said. She forced a laugh. Guess he had a short commute. We tried to make jokes about it, but they didn't really land. That night, she left the hallway light on, which she never did before. A couple days later, I ran into Carl again while he was checking his mail. I mentioned the name from the deed, just to see if he'd heard it before. His face changed in this subtle way. His eyes got flatter, if that makes sense. Yeah, I know it, he said. He was sort of the caretaker for that place. Dug the holes, filled them back in, lived in your house back when it was one family. Storm took him out, they say. Ground collapsed under him while he was digging. That's the story my granddad told me anyway. In the cemetery? I asked. Where else? Carl said. He glanced past me toward the back of the graveyard. Whole family's over there. Him too, supposedly. What do you mean supposedly? I said. He shifted his mail in his hands. Just stories. People said he never stopped working. Old folks used to tell kids to be home before dark, or the digger would come walking the rows. Scare tactics. You know how people are. I went down to the Historical Society, I said. Their map doesn't show his grave. Carl's jaw tensed. Records aren't always right. He started up his walk. Those graves aren't what you think they are, he called over his shoulder. Don't let it get in your head. That was the most he would say. After that, it was like I couldn't not notice things. The smell of damp earth inside the house, every so often, with no reason. The way the air in the hallway felt colder near the front door some nights. Just for a few minutes, like someone had opened it and let the night in, even though the deadbolt was still thrown. The motion light coming on and staying on longer, casting our shadows against the blinds, even when we were both in the same room. Once, around 3 a.m. again, I woke up to this slow, steady sound. A kind of dull chop, pause, dull chop, pause. Not loud, but heavy. It took me a second to place it, and then my brain supplied the image of a shovel hitting dirt. I lay there, holding my breath, counting the beats. After a while, it stopped. When I finally got the nerve to look through the bedroom curtain, the cemetery was just a darker patch of night, the street empty, our porch light off. I could have gone over there to check, I didn't. The last part of this, the part that finally made me stop trying so hard to explain everything away, wasn't dramatic either. No figure in the doorway, no hand reaching out from the ground. Just a small, ordinary thing that didn't fit anywhere. It was a rainy Sunday. Melissa was at her sister's place for the weekend, so I had the house to myself. The rain came down steady, tapping on the windows, making the whole street look washed out and gray. I put a pot of coffee on and wandered into the living room while it brewed. Out of habit, I glanced across the street. Even in the rain, I could see the back part of the cemetery pretty clearly. The trees were bare enough by then. The single stone stood out, dark with water. The flowers at its base were there again. Not soggy, not drooping, just standing up straight, petals open. I watched the rain for a while. It was coming down hard enough that you could see it bouncing off the low brick wall and the tops of the stones. The gravel path was a pale streak. I remember thinking, whoever put those flowers there is nuts. They're going to be ruined in an hour. I went into the kitchen, poured coffee, answered a couple emails, wasted time online. Maybe half an hour passed. The rain never let up. If anything, it got heavier. At some point, the radiator gave a sharp knock that made me jump. A chipmunk that lives near the porch darted across the sidewalk and disappeared into the hedge. Its fur slicked to its body, and then everything outside went weirdly quiet. No more chattering, no birds, just the rain. When I went back into the living room and looked out again, the flowers on that grave were exactly the same. Not beaten down, not even tilted. The rest of the cemetery looked like you'd expect. Water running in little rivulets down the sloped ground, leaves plastered to the stones. A small branch snapped off one of the trees near the wall. But those flowers might as well have been under glass. I told myself there had to be some logical reason. Maybe they were fake and just really good. Maybe there was some kind of plastic covering I couldn't see from that distance. Maybe the angle made it look worse than it was. I stood there, pressing my hand against the cold window, watching the rain hammer everything but that one small spot of color. And I couldn't make it add up. I still go to work. I still pay bills. Melissa and I still joke about living across from the quiet side of town, but not as often. Sometimes at night, the porch light flickers on by itself, and I don't check the window right away. I've stopped asking down at City Hall about old burial records. The last time I walked past the Historical Society, Joyce looked up and then quickly down again, like she hoped I'd keep going. People live next to cemeteries all over the world. Most of them never see or hear anything unusual. Maybe I haven't either, not really. Maybe it's all just timing and suggestion and a brain that doesn't like loose ends. I can't prove there's anything wrong with that grave, or with this house, or with the way the insects fall silent sometimes, right when I step onto the porch. All I know is that no matter the weather, no matter the season, no matter how hard the wind blows, or how heavy the rain comes down, the flowers on that grave are always fresh.